A woman with the red ears of a beast crouched over him and sniffed his neck. For a long time, like a predator deciding whether to eat its prey or leave it be. In her right hand she held a stone knife, and he lay on the sand with his hands bound, surrounded by 24 corpses in black armor, thinking only one thing. Don't move. Look her in the eyes. Breathe steadily. His name was Lee Tae Hoon. For 10 years, he'd been drifting through places where one wrong move meant a knife in the liver. Vietnam, Kenya, Laos. Villages where they want to kill you first and maybe talk to you later. Panic had long since burned out of him completely. So now he just breathes. Water is still pouring into his nose. Sand stings his cheek. It smells of smoke and a sweetish rot. He squints. 3 boats are burning out on the shoal. Long, narrow. Bodies in black leather lie scattered around them. 20, maybe more. And warriors are walking among the bodies. Tall, very tall, with spears made of dark wood, and some of them have animal ears on their heads. Red, gray, brown. A woman above him snorts. She stands up. She barks something at the others in a low, sharp voice. He doesn't understand a single word, but he picks up on the tone right away. This one's alive. He's mine. 2 of them grab him by the shoulders and drag him across the sand, past burning boats, past corpses, past warriors who stare at him as if he were a strange insect. What is this thing? Why is it here? Can it be eaten? They toss him into a dugout canoe onto the stinking hides. A woman jumps in last. She sits at the bow. She places her spear across her knees, and the canoe races upstream. Tae Hoon lies on his back and stares at a strange blue sky. Birds he doesn't recognize are screaming. Trees he doesn't recognize stretch out before him. His mind clings to the last thing he remembers. A storm, a boat, his temple hitting the side of the boat, water, darkness, a strange hold filled with bound people, screams, blows. And now he's here, alive, in a world that can't exist. But it does. The boat has been traveling for 2 hours. The engineer inside counts the turns on his own. 7 to the right, 4 to the left. The river is 80 meters wide at its narrowest point. The banks are high. The jungle reaches right up to the water's edge. And this is where the real fun begins. The jungle parts, and he sees a camp. He expects a village, huts, order. But what he sees is chaos. 24 huts made of branches and animal skins are scattered along the bank in no particular order. Women, children, and old people wander about. Some has animal ears, some have none. Bonfires burn right on the bare ground. And that's when the engineer in him kicks in without asking. The huts are in a low-lying area. They'll flood when it rains. Bonfires on the ground, no fire when it rains, and they get their water downstream. He sees a woman with a pot walking down to the river further downstream from where another is washing a hide. Further downstream from where the children are relieving themselves by the bushes. He closes his eyes, opens them. No, he wasn't mistaken. They're drinking water, they're polluting themselves. And their children have stomach aches. He's sure of it. Maybe they're dying. The boat bumps against the bank. They're dragging him through the camp again. Someone pokes him in the side with a stick. Someone spits. Children run after him, screaming. A boy of about 10 swings a rock at him. A woman with red ears lets out a short, low growl. The boy jumps back as if struck. They drag him into a large hut in the center. It's dark inside. It smells of smoke and old age. An old man sits on a bed of leaves. He's gaunt. His face is like a baked apple. His eyes are sharp and lively. Around his neck is a necklace of fangs. The elder. Tae Hoon realizes this immediately. From the way everyone falls silent. From the way the woman with red ears lowers her head for the first time. The old man stares at him for a long time. Then he utters a series of questions. Who? Where from? Why? The woman answers quickly, pointing at the river, at the bank, at him. The old man listens. He raises his hand. She falls silent. The old man stares at the stranger for a long time and utters a single word. Tae Hoon doesn't know it, but seeing how everyone around him tenses up, he understands its meaning. Live for now. They lead him to a hut on the edge of the camp. They untie his hands, but they tie a long vine around his wrist and twist the other end around a stake driven into the ground. A tether, just like for an animal. A woman brings a pot of murky water and a piece of dried meat. She sets it down by the entrance. She looks at him. He takes the pot. He sniffs it. It smells like mud. He puts it back and doesn't drink. She frowns. He shakes his head. He points at the water, then at his stomach. He grimaces. He shows that he's not well. She doesn't understand, or doesn't want to. She snorts and walks away. Tae Hoon sits down with his back to the post and thinks. He's alive. That's one. He's in a world where he shouldn't be. That's two. He knows neither the language nor the rules, nor who these people are or why they have animal ears. But there's one thing he knows for sure. These people drink dirty water. Their children are sick. Their huts stand in low-lying areas. Their campfires go out in the rain. And he knows how to fix all of this. Not with magic, not with a miracle. With sand, charcoal, bamboo, his hands. He needs only one thing, for at least someone to give him a chance to prove himself. 3 days. For 3 days he sat tied up and watched. In the morning, the women went to the river for water, downstream, past the place where they washed the hides, past the place where they dumped their waste. Every time, Tae Hoon counted. 6 pots in the morning, 4 in the evening, for the whole camp, about 80 people. That's not enough. And the water was dirty. On the first day, he saw a boy of about 5. The boy was sitting by the hut across from him, clutching his stomach. His mother was standing nearby, rubbing his back. On the second day, the boy was lying down, not sitting, lying down. On the third day, he was gone. He hadn't died. They'd carried him away somewhere deep into the camp. But Tae Hoon saw the mother's face as she returned. Gray, empty. He clenched his teeth. Nam Yu came twice a day. In the morning, she brought water and meat. In the evening, she came just to check on him. She would squat at the entrance to the hut. She looked at him. He looked at her. They didn't understand a word each other said. But in 3 days, he'd learned something. Her name was Nam Yu. She pointed her finger at her chest and said it twice. He pointed to his chest and said, Tae Hoon. She tried to repeat it. It came out as Tae Hoon. Close. On the third evening, he decided he couldn't wait any longer. The children were sick now. Not tomorrow, not in a week, now. When Nam Yu arrived, he was ready. On the sand in front of the shelter, he drew a simple diagram with a stick, a river, a camp, an arrow showing where the water flows from. The place where they get water. The place where they wash the hides. The place where they dump the waste. Everything in a straight line. He poked the diagram with the stick and pointed to the river. Then he pointed to his stomach. He grimaced. He acted as if he were in pain, like a child. Nam Yu watched. She didn't understand, or perhaps she understood but didn't see the connection. Tae Hoon didn't give up. He scooped up a handful of sand, coarse sand. He put it in a pile. He scooped up a handful of fine sand. He placed it next to the first pile. Then he took some charcoal from the extinguished fire pit by the shelter. He crushed it in his hand. He placed it in a third pile. He pointed at the sand, at the charcoal, at the water in the pot. Murky. Then he began using his hands to demonstrate what needed to be done. A hole. Layers. Sand. Charcoal. Sand. Stones on top. Water flows through them. It comes out clean. Nam Yu tilted her head. That was her gesture. Cat-like. When she doesn't understand but is curious. Then she said something briefly. She stood up. She left. He thought she wouldn't come back. That his efforts had been in vain. That tomorrow they'd feed him to the crocodiles, or whatever lived in the river here. But she returned, an hour later, and she wasn't alone. Elder Cho was following her. Small, thin, leaning on a cane. His eyes were the same as ever, sharp, lively. Tae Hoon straightened up. Nam Yu pointed to the diagram in the sand. She began to speak, quickly, passionately. She pointed first at him, then at the drawing, then at the river. Cho listened in silence. Then he approached. He crouched down. He looked at the diagram. He looked at the piles of sand and charcoal. He looked at Tae Hoon. And he asked a question. One word. Tae Hoon didn't know the language, but he understood the intonation. Why? He pointed at the child they'd taken away that morning, at his stomach, at the water, at the diagram. And he made a gesture that meant the same thing in any language, anywhere in the world. Open palms facing forward. I want to help. Choi was silent for a long time. Then he turned to Nam Yu and said 3 words. She nodded. She smiled. And she cut the vine on his wrist, not all the way through. She left a long end. The tether became longer. He could now walk to the river. It wasn't freedom, it was permission to show himself. The next morning, Nam Yu brought 5 women to him. They stood in a semicircle and looked at him as if he were a strange animal that had suddenly begun to speak. One of them was old, tall, with bear-like ears. Her face was stern, her hands were rough. Later, he would learn that her name was Mon Halmi and that she was the most respected of the elder women. Tae Hoon led them upstream from the camp, past the last hut, past the place where they drew water. Further on, 70 meters. There, the bank rose, sandy soil, rocks, a clear patch with no signs of people. He stopped, crouched down, touched the ground. It was wet, a good sign. The groundwater was close. He began digging a hole with his hands, a small one. He pointed at the women, pointed at the ground. Dig. They exchanged glances. Mon Halmi snorted, but she looked at Nam Yu. Nam Yu nodded, and Mon Halmi began to dig. The others followed her. An hour later, the hole was waist deep, 2 steps wide. Tae Hong went to the river. He gathered large stones, then small ones. Then he cut bamboo, thin stalks. There were plenty of them on the riverbank. Then he gathered charcoal from the fire pits, a lot of it, 2 pots worth. The women watched. They didn't help. They waited. He began to lay it out, large stones at the bottom of the pit. On top of them, a layer of coarse sand, as thick as a palm. Then a layer of charcoal, as thick as a palm. Then a layer of fine sand. Then charcoal again. Then fine sand again. He placed stones on top to hold it in place. Then he inserted a bamboo tube into the bottom of the pit, at an angle, so that the water seeping through all the layers would flow down the tube. He led the end of the tube outside, above an empty pot. Then he brought a pot of river water, murky. It had a distinct smell, and he poured it over the stones. The water soaked in. It seeped downward. Everyone watched the tube. Nothing happened. Tae Hoon waited. The women exchanged glances. Mon Halmi had already opened her mouth to say something. And then water began to flow from the tube, a thin stream, slowly, clear, no smell of silt, pure. Mon Halmi fell silent. Nam Yu crouched down and cupped her hand. She scooped up some water. She sniffed it. She tasted it. Her eyes widened. She turned to the women and said something. Her voice was quiet, almost bewildered. Old Mon Halmi approached. She cupped some water in her palm. She drank it. She froze. Then she looked at her palms. She looked at the filter. She looked at Tae Hoon, and for the first time ever, he saw something other than suspicion in her eyes. Not trust. Not yet. But something. By evening, the whole camp knew about it. People came to look. They touched the pipe. They tasted the water. Some drank and said nothing. Some drank and shook their heads. Mon Halmi brought a second pot and placed it under the pipe to replace the first one when it was full. The children gathered around. They poked their fingers into the sand. One boy tried to dig a hole and got such a slap on the back of the head from Mon Halmi that he rolled across the grass. In the evening, Cho arrived. With him were two men, hunters, burly men. One of them was young, tall, and looked like Nam Yu, the same leopard-like ears, the same sharp movements, but his gaze was different, harsh, contemptuous. It was Ho Dae, Nam Yu's cousin. Tae Hoon didn't know his name yet, but from the way he looked at him, everything was clear. He didn't like him. An outsider. Weak. He didn't belong here. Cho walked over to the filter. He scooped up some water, tasted it. He remained silent. Then he turned to Nam Yu. He said something. She nodded. Cho turned to Tae Hoon, and for the first time, he addressed him directly. He said two words. Tae Hoon didn't understand the words, but he understood the gesture. The elder pointed at the filter. Then he spread his arms wide. "Show me more." Tae Hoon nodded. He pointed at the huts, at the lowland where they stood, at the sky. He mimed rain with his hands. Then he showed how the water rose, how it flooded. Then he pointed to the nearby hill, higher, drier. He pointed to the posts, to the roof. He showed that they could build higher up, on stilts. Cho watched. Ho Dae, standing behind him, crossed his arms over his chest and turned away. But Cho didn't turn away. And that night, Tae Hoon's tether grew even longer. He could now walk around half the camp. A week later, the children's stomach aches stopped. Not all at once, but the mothers noticed. Tae Hoon saw how the women began to go only to the filter. Not a single one went downstream with a pot. Mon Halmi kept an eye on this herself. If someone went to the old spot out of habit, she'd call out and point her stick toward the filter. No explanations, she just pointed. That was enough. The rope was removed from his wrist on the 5th day. Not by Cho, by Nam Yu. She came in the morning. Silently, she cut through the vine. She tossed the scrap into the bushes and left. He stood there, rubbing his wrist. The red mark from the rope was already beginning to heal. He was free. Not entirely, he understood that. The camp stood in the middle of the jungle. There was nowhere to run. Running away from the only people who didn't want to kill him would be suicide. But the rope was gone. That meant something. He started with the huts. Every day he walked around the camp. He counted his steps. He looked at the ground. He felt the soil. He sniffed the air. An engineer's habits, assessing the site. That's what he did in Kenya before digging a well. That's what he'd done in Laos before building a bridge. Only there he'd had tools, a level, a tape measure, a notepad. Here he had a stick and his own footsteps. Enough. The problem with the huts was simple. They stood in a low-lying area. The soil there was clayey, compact. The water wouldn't drain. Every time it rained, the camp turned into a swamp. The animal hides on the roofs were rotting. The food was spoiling. Inside the huts, it was damp and stuffy. People slept on the ground, on wet leaves. The solution was simple, too. Moving the camp wasn't an option. He realized that right away. 80 people weren't going to drop everything and move to a new place just because some stranger told them to. So they had to raise it up, on stilts. He'd seen it 100 times. In the villages of Cambodia, in Laos, houses on stilts. The floor a meter off the ground. Air circulates underneath. The dampness doesn't reach it. Rats don't get in. We need wood. We need hands. We need time. And we need someone to give permission. He went to Nam Yu. Over the course of 2 weeks, a strange language had developed between them. Half gestures, half drawings in the sand, half individual words that he memorized. 5 a day. Water, fire, wood, stone, food, good, bad, more, higher, no. He drew a hut for her. Then he drew posts beneath it. Then he used his hands to show how the floor rose. Then he showed rain. And a dry floor. She watched. She thought. Then she said a single word he already knew. Chue. The elder's permission is needed. He nodded. But Chue was in no hurry. The elder had other problems. Tae Hoon could tell by the expressions on the faces of the hunters returning from the jungle. Every day they left at dawn. Every evening they returned, sometimes with prey, sometimes without. There wasn't enough meat. He saw how the women divided the pieces, larger portions for the children, smaller portions for themselves. The best cuts went to the hunters, the rest got whatever was left. Twice he saw the old men not eat at all. They just sat by the fire and watched the others eat. It was hunger, not the sharp kind, not the kind that makes you collapse. Quiet, constant, familiar. They'd lived with it for so long they no longer noticed it. Tae Hoon noticed, and he realized the tents could wait. Food first. He remembered Vietnam, a village on the Black River. There, the locals built weirs out of stones and branches across the side channels. The fish swam in and couldn't get out. A simple trap. No nets, no boats, no hooks needed. Stones, branches, hands, time. He walked along the bank. Half a kilometer from the camp, further upstream, there was a side channel, narrow, about 5 meters wide, shallow. The current was weak, perfect. He called Nam Yu over. He pointed it out. She frowned. Hunters don't fish. Fishing is for those who can't hunt, for old people, for cripples. He didn't know those words, but he could read it on her face. Contempt. Not malicious, refined. In her world, a true warrior strikes down a beast with a spear, not rummaging through the mud with stones. Tae Hoon didn't argue. Arguing was pointless. He simply set to work on his own, alone. On the first day, he hauled stones, heavy ones, wet ones, slippery ones. He wasn't strong. His hands trembled, his back burned. By evening, he had laid out a row of stones across the channel, 1 meter long out of the 5 needed. Nam Yu came by that evening. She looked at his work, at his hands covered in scrapes, at his wet clothes. She snorted and walked away. The next day he continued, alone. By noon, the stones nearby had run out. He had to carry them from far away. He carried them, one by one, slowly. By evening, the row had grown half a meter longer. On the third day, when he came to the channel, someone was already there. Man Homi, an old woman with bear ears. She stood knee-deep in water, laying out stones, silently. 2 other women stood nearby. They were laying stones too, without a word. Tae Hoon stopped on the bank. Man Homi looked up. She looked at him. She muttered something. He didn't understand the words, but he got the gist. "What are you standing there for? Come here, show me where to put them." By the end of the third day, the row was finished, across the entire channel. Tae Hoon added branches, long, flexible ones, and stuck them between the stones, bending them downstream. It formed a wall. The water flowed through. The fish didn't. Then he built a second row, further up the channel, about 20 meters from the first. Between the 2 rows, a pen was formed. The fish swam in. They didn't swim out. On the morning of the 4th day, he came, and there were enough fish in the pen to fill 2 pots, large, shiny, alive. Man Homi stood on the bank and watched. Then she turned to him and smiled, for the first time, widely. She was missing some teeth, but the smile was genuine. By evening, the whole camp knew about it. The women came to look, then the children came, then the hunters came. Ho Day came too. He stood on the shore. He looked at the fish in the pen. His face was stony. He didn't say a word. He turned and walked away. But the other hunters stayed. One of them, a young man with wolf-like ears, crouched down by the water. He looked at the rocks, at the branches. Then he looked at Tae Hoon and asked him something. It was the first time one of the hunters had addressed him with a question rather than a taunt. Tae Hoon didn't understand the words, but he understood. How? How did you do that? He pointed. The rocks, the branches, the angle, the current. Simply. The hunter watched. He nodded. And the next day, he built a second dam, further down the stream, by himself, without help. A little crooked, but it worked. Tae Hoon saw it that morning and just stood there watching. It was more important than clean water, more important than a filter. For the first time, one of them had repeated what he'd shown them, on his own, without being told, because he saw that it worked. Cho arrived on the third day after the weirs started yielding fish. Every morning, they pulled 2 or 3 pots out of the channel. They smoked the fish on sticks over the campfires. They had a supply now, for the first time in a long time. The elder stood by the weir and silently looked at the water. Then he turned to Tae Hoon. He didn't say a word. He just nodded and walked away. That evening, Nam Yu came to his hut and for the first time sat down next to him, not across from him, next to him, shoulder to shoulder. They sat in silence. They looked at the river. She smelled of game and smoke. He smelled of sweat and river mud. She turned her head and looked at him. He turned his head and looked at her. Her eyes were yellow, with vertical pupils, beautiful, alien. She said one word, quietly. He would learn it later. It meant, mine. After the success with the filter, the leash was removed, and Tae Hoon was given freedom to move about the camp. He wanted to build huts on stilts, but realized he needed to solve the food problem first. He built fish weirs on a side channel. First one, then more with the women's help. The young hunter with wolf-like ears replicated the design himself. A steady supply of smoked fish appeared. Nam Yu sat next to him for the first time and called him hers. The rainy season arrived 10 days later. Tae Hong was waiting for it. He had seen the signs: clouds growing heavier toward evening, humidity that kept his skin damp, birds that had stopped chirping in the mornings, and the ants. The ants were climbing up the tree trunks. In Kenya, that meant only one thing: the water was coming. The first rain hit during the night. Tae Hoon woke up to find the water already ankle-deep in his hut. He made his way outside. The camp was floating. The low-lying area where the hut stood had turned into a lake. People were running out of their huts, dragging children, grabbing pots, bags of meat, weapons. All the campfires had gone out. Darkness, a downpour, screams, chaos. He stood knee-deep in water and watched. In the morning, when the rain had subsided, the camp looked as if it had been raided. Half the huts had sagged. The animal skin roofs hung limply. The meat supplies were soaked. Pots of grain had tipped over. Baskets of dried fish had been swept away toward the river. People sat on the wet ground in silence. They had been through this before. This wasn't their first rainy season. They knew it would last 2 months, maybe 3, and every time it was back to square one. Tae Hong went to see Chue. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't ask Nam Yu to intercede. He came himself. The elder was sitting in his hut. The water reached his ankles. He sat on a raised platform made of sticks and animal hides. He was the only one in the camp who had thought to sleep on high ground. Tae Hoon sat down across from him. He scooped up some mud from the floor with a stick. He smoothed it out, and he began to draw. Posts, a floor supported by posts, a roof, higher up, dry. He pointed to the water beneath his feet. He pointed to the drawing. He pointed out the difference. Cho watched. He said nothing. Standing behind him was Cho Rin, the elder's daughter. Tae Hoon had seen her before. Short, slender, no animal-like features, human. Her black hair was tied back at the nape of her neck. A cloth cape draped over her shoulders. A rarity. Cloth was a luxury in this world. She wasn't looking at the drawing. She was looking at him, scrutinizingly, calmly, like someone accustomed to assessing people. Cho turned to his daughter. He said something. She leaned toward the drawing. She looked at it closely, and for the first time, she spoke directly to Tae Hoon, slowly, clearly, as if speaking to a child learning a language. She pointed to the pillars in the drawing, then to the trees behind the hut. Then she raised her hand with her fingers spread apart. Then again. 10. She needed 10 trees. She asked how many. Tae Hoon shook his head. He pointed to Cho's hut, then to all the other huts. Then he raised his hands. Many. She needed many trees. Cho Rin translated for her father. The elder was silent for a long time. Then he asked a question. Cho Rin translated using gestures. People. How many people were needed? Tae Hoon counted on his fingers. 20. Cho raised an eyebrow. 20 people was a quarter of all the adults in the camp. These were hunters who could go out to hunt for meat. That's 20 women who could gather roots. 20 people for a mysterious construction project when the camp was flooded. The elder thought about it for a long time. Tae Hoon waited. Then Cho looked at the water on the floor of his hut and nodded. Construction began the next day. Tae Hoon chose the site, not in the lowlands, higher up. On a gentle slope about 30 meters from the river, the soil there was different, sandy. The water drained away. They chopped down trees with stone axes, slowly, painfully, one tree trunk in half a day. Tae Hoon stood there and counted. 8 posts per house, 5 houses to start with, 40 posts. At that pace, it would take 20 days just to cut them down. Too long. He began to think. He looked at the axes. Stone, dull, heavy. The blade crumbled after 10 strikes. He needed proper tools. But to make proper tools, he needed a forge. And to build a forge, he needed ore, a furnace, and bellows. That would take months. He didn't have months. It's raining now. He took a different approach. Fire. Controlled fire. He showed the workers how to use fire to undercut the tree. Chop a quarter of the trunk with a stone axe. Then build a small fire at the base. Control the flames with wet hides. The tree burns along the cut. Faster than chopping. More dangerous, but faster. The first tree fell on the second day. It fell unevenly. It nearly crushed a worker. Tae Hoon flinched. He felt his heart drop to his heels. He walked over. He examined the stump. The fire had spread away from the cut. He needed to control it better. He demonstrated, again, slower, more carefully. The second tree fell straight, so did the third. By the end of the first week, they had enough logs for the first house. He built it simply, 4 posts dug into the ground. No, not dug in. He did it differently. He dug holes, deep ones, waist deep. He set a post, filled it with stones, tamped it down, then he poured wet clay over it. The clay dried and held the stones in place. The post stood firm. It didn't sway in the wind. It didn't rot in the wet ground so quickly. Between the dugs, he laid crossbeams. He secured them with vines. He didn't just wrap them around. He remembered how they did it in Laos, a crisscross pattern. The vine goes around the post, then around the beam, then back around the post. Tight, secure, it doesn't slip. The floor was laid with split logs, tightly. The gaps were filled with dry grass mixed with clay. The roof was made of long palm leaves, a thick layer, in 3 rows, so that water would run off rather than seep through. The first house was ready in 12 days, small, 4 by 3 meters. The floor was just over a meter above the ground. A bamboo ladder, a sloped roof to keep out the rain. It was dry inside. Tae Hoon climbed inside. It was raining outside. Heavy rain. A wall of water. Water was flowing beneath the house, across the ground, around the posts, but inside it was dry. The floor wasn't wet. The air was fresh. The draft coming through the cracks in the walls wasn't rain. He sat down on the floor and exhaled. It works. Chae Rin was the first to ask to see the inside of the house. She climbed the ladder, carefully. She walked across the floor. She touched the walls. She looked at the roof. Then she looked at Tae Hoon, and she said 3 words. Then she repeated them more slowly when she saw that he didn't understand. And she added a gesture, her hand on her heart. Then her hand outstretched, palm up. All right, that's good. He nodded. She didn't need to explain why. She already understood. That same day, she brought 10 more people to Tae Hoon, women and elderly people, on her own initiative, without an order from Chae. She simply brought them and said something to them. They picked up stone axes and went to the trees. 5 houses were ready within a month. Small, simple, but dry. The mothers and children were the first to move in. Ma An Halmi gave the order. Not Cho, not Namyu, Ma An Halmi. She simply pointed to show who would go first, and no one argued. It rained every day, but the children slept dry, for the first time in 5 seasons. Tae Hong stood below one of the houses, listening to a child laughing upstairs. Nam Yu approached from behind. He didn't hear her. She moved silently, just as a leopard should. She stood beside him, listening too. Then she placed her hand on his shoulder, heavy, hot. He didn't move. She said something quietly. He didn't understand the words, but he recognized the voice. For the first time, there was no demand, no command, no possessiveness in it, just warmth. In the middle of the rainy season, illness struck. Tae Hong found out that morning when he saw that 3 hunters hadn't come out of their huts. then 4, then 7. Fever, stomach pain, vomiting. One of the old men was lying on the ground near his hut and couldn't get up. His skin was gray, his eyes were cloudy. The women were running between the huts with pots of water and wet rags. Tae Hoon saw this and understood. It wasn't the water. Those who drank from the filter got sick less often, but they still got sick. So the water was part of the problem, not the whole problem. He walked through the camp. He looked. He sniffed. He counted. Old tents in the lowlands, the ones that hadn't been moved yet. Water was standing there, warm, dirty. Everything was breeding in it. Trash from butchering meat lay scattered between the huts. Bones, hides, offal, flies. Thousands of flies. Rats rustled under every hut. People relieved themselves right next to their dwellings, sometimes just 10 steps from where they prepared food. He closed his eyes. It was a classic case. He'd seen this in Kenya, in a camp for displaced persons by Lake Turkana. Dirty water, unsanitary conditions, overcrowding. The result? Dysentery, or something like it. Back then, he'd had chlorine tablets and a Red Cross medical tent. Here, he had nothing, except his wits. He went to look for So-A, the medic. He knew about her. He'd seen her. A short, quiet girl with a long black braid. No animal-like features. A human. The daughter of a shaman from another clan. Taken in as a child. Raised as one of their own. She was the only one in the camp who treated people. With herbs, compresses, spells. He found her by the large tent where the sick lay. 5 people. A 6th on the way. So-A sat on the floor among them. Her hands were elbow-deep in something green. It smelled bitter. She was rubbing a herbal paste onto someone's chest. Her face was calm, but her hands moved quickly. She was afraid. Tae Hoon crouched down by the entrance. She looked up. She looked at him. No hostility, no interest. She just looked. She had no time for that. He pointed at the sick people, then at the camp outside the hut's walls. Then he ran his hand across the floor. Dirt, trash, water. He showed her there was a connection. A watched with him. She wasn't stupid. She was the smartest of everyone he'd met here. She knew for herself that dirt was bad. But in her system of knowledge, dirt was evil spirits. And evil spirits are driven out with herbs and songs. Tae Hoon couldn't explain the theory of germs to her. He had neither the words nor the concepts nor a microscope for that. But he could show her. He stood up. He gestured for her to follow him. She didn't go. She looked at the sick people, then at him. He waited. Then he pointed at the sick people, at the door, at himself. "I'll help, but let's go." She hesitated. Then she called over another woman. She handed her the paste. She said something, and she followed him. He led her to the river, to the spot where the women washed their hands after butchering meat. The water was murky, reddish. He scooped some of that water into a pot. Then he led her to the filter. He ran the same water through the filter. He showed her the difference, murky and clear. Then he scooped clear water from the filter into 2 pots. He left one uncovered in the sun next to a pile of trash. He covered the second one with a flat stone and placed it in the shade on a clean spot. He pointed at them. Then he said, "We'll see tomorrow." So A watched his every move. The next day he brought her back. The uncovered pot stank. A film was floating on the surface. Flies were swarming around it. The covered pot was clean. The water was clear, odorless. So A stood there looking at the 2 pots for a long time. She wasn't stupid. She could see the difference. She just didn't know why. Tae Hoon didn't bother to explain why. He showed her what it was. Dirt near water makes the water dirty. Dirty water makes people sick. Clean water and clean hands make people healthy. Simple. He showed her one more thing. He filled a pot with water, put it on the stove, brought it to a boil, took it off the heat, let it cool, showed her. Boiled water, even cleaner than filtered water, for the sick, for those whose stomachs already hurt. Only boiled water. So A watched the steam rising from the pot. Then she looked at him, and for the first time she spoke to him, slowly, quietly. He didn't understand the words, but he understood what she was asking. "How do you know that?" He didn't answer. How could he explain that in his world, every schoolchild knows this, that bacteria die at 100 degrees, that clean water has saved more lives than all medicines combined? He just shrugged and pointed to the sick people in the hut. "Let's get to work." They worked. Tae Hoon organized the cleanup of the camp, not by himself, through Soa. She spoke to the women in their language. She explained, in her own way. He heard a word that kept coming up, something about spirits. She explained the cleanup in terms of spirits. Dirt attracts evil spirits. Cleanliness drives them away. He didn't care how she explained it, as long as it worked. They began carrying the waste from butchering downstream from the camp, far away, 200 meters. He showed them where to dig a pit for the waste, a deep one, far from the water, far from the living quarters. Now they relieved themselves in one place, the pit, at the far end of the camp, behind the bushes. Cover it with ashes after each use. The women grumbled. It was a long walk. Inconvenient. But Soa stood next to the pit every morning and watched, silently. That was enough. 3 days after they started cleaning up, he showed Soa one more thing. Hand washing. Ash from the campfires, grease from cooking. He mixed them together. It made a coarse paste. Not soap, far from soap. But the lye from the ash plus the grease is the simplest cleaning solution. He lathered his hands with this paste in front of Soa, rubbed them, rinsed them with water, showed her. His hands were cleaner. The smell was different. Soa tried it. She rubbed her palms together. She sniffed. She looked at her hands, then at him, and nodded, briefly, firmly. She understood. A week later, a new rule appeared in the camp. Wash your hands before eating. Wash your hands before cooking. Wash your hands after cleaning up. A pot of ash and fat paste stood by every campfire. So, A kept watch. Ma'an Halmi helped. The old woman with bear ears turned out to be the perfect overseer. A single glance from her was enough to make even the most stubborn hunter go to the pot of paste. The disease receded after 2 weeks. Not immediately, not miraculously. Slowly, quietly. There were simply fewer new cases, then even fewer. Then they stopped to appear at all. 2 old men didn't survive. Tae Hong saw them being carried away into the jungle. Quietly, without screams, only their relatives cried. The rest stood there in silence. Death here was familiar, frequent, ordinary. He clenched his teeth. 2. It could have been 20. It could have been more. But it was 2. Because of the filter, because of boiling the water, because of hand washing, because of the trash pits. Simple things, basic, but new to these people. So A came to him that evening, the day the last patient got back on his feet. She brought a pot of hot brew, herbal tea. She set it down at the entrance to his hut. He looked at the pot, then at her. She didn't say anything. She just stood there. He took the pot, tasted it. Bitter, but hot, and that gesture said it all. Thank you, or not thank you, something else. Acknowledgement. You know things I don't know, and I want to know them too. She sat down across from him, squatting, just like Nam Yu had on the first day, but differently. Nam Yu would have sat next to him, shoulder to shoulder, because she's Nam Yu. Soa sat across from him, at arm's length, because she's Soa. And she began to speak, slowly, gesturing with her hands. She asked about boiling, why hot water is better than cold, what exactly puts out a fire, how it works. Tae Hoon listened. He didn't understand half the words, but he understood what was happening. She's learning. She wants to learn. He showed her, as best he could, with gestures, with drawings on the floor, with little clay figures. Dirt is made up of tiny enemies, very tiny, invisible to the eye, but they're there. Fire kills them. Cleanliness keeps them from growing. Soa listened. She nodded. She didn't believe him. Or perhaps she believed him in her own way. Her eyes said she was translating his words into her own language. Little enemies are evil spirits. Fire drives out spirits. Cleanliness drives away spirits. The result is the same. The explanation is different. He didn't care. The main thing was that she wash her hands. She left late. She took the pot with her, empty. And the next morning, Tae Hoon saw that So-ah was boiling her tools. Her stone knives, which she used to cut herbs. Her sticks, which she used to stir the decoctions. Her rags, which she used to wipe down the sick. All of this was lying in boiling water in a large pot on the stove. He stood there watching. She looked up. She looked at him. She didn't smile, but there was something in her eyes. He'd seen it before. In the eyes of young engineers when they understand how the system works and start thinking for themselves. So-ah was thinking for herself. That was more important than all the filters and dams combined. Because he was the only one. And the illnesses would come again. But if So-ah understood the principle, if she'd started thinking along those lines, then maybe next time she'd manage without him. That evening, Nam-yu came to his hut and caught the scent of someone else's tea there. She didn't say a word, but her ears were pressed flat against her head. And her tail, which she didn't have, but which he seemed to see from the movements of her body, that invisible tail darted from side to side. She sniffed the air. She looked at the teapot. She looked at Tae Hoon. And she left, silently. He sat there thinking that in a world full of disease, raids, and famine, the only thing he didn't need was jealousy among women. But he thought about that too. Nothing human is alien to people, even if they have leopard ears. Tomorrow he had to start smoking the fish. The weirs provided fish every day, but the fish would spoil within a day in this heat. He needed smokehouses, permanent ones, with smoke, so that meat and fish would keep for weeks, not hours. It was still raining, but inside the new houses on stilts, it was dry. The sick were recovering. The weirs were working. The filter was working. He'd been here less than 2 months, and the camp was already changing. Slowly, but changing. Tai Hong lay down on the floor of his hut. Wet. Old. He built houses for others, but he himself still slept in the first hut on the edge of the camp. He closed his eyes. The rain pounded on the roof. Somewhere far away in the jungle, a bird cried out. He thought about tomorrow, the smokehouse, then the warehouses, then, maybe, when the rain stopped, the stilts for the rest of the huts. Then the smelter. The smelter needs ore. To find ore, you need to know where to look. To do that, you have to leave the camp. To do that, you need guides, and for the guides, you need Hode, who can't stand him. He smiled in the darkness. There's a lot to do. Time is short. There aren't enough hands. As usual. Like in Kenya. Like in Laos. Only here there's no helicopter that will fly in if things get really bad. Here, there's only him, and the people around him, who are starting to believe in him. Slowly. One by one. But they're starting to. During the rainy season, an intestinal disease broke out in the camp. Tae Hoon found a doctor, So-ah, and together with her, organized sanitary measures. Boiling water for the sick. Washing hands with a paste made of ash and fat. Pits for trash and waste. The disease subsided after 2 weeks. 2 elderly people died, but without these measures, the losses would have been much greater. So-ah began boiling instruments on her own and learning new principles. Nam-yu sensed a foreign scent in Tae Hong's tent and became jealous. Tae Hong is preparing to build smokehouses and storage sheds. The rains stopped overnight. In the evening, the downpour pounded the roofs so hard that voices could not be heard. In the morning, the sky was clear, blue, empty. The air felt different, drier, lighter. The puddles between the huts began to dry up by noon. Tae Hong stepped out of his hut and looked at the camp. 5 houses on stilts stood firm. Not a single post had tilted. Not a single roof had sagged. Children played on the dry floors upstairs. Women were drying hides on racks that he hadn't planned for, but that Man Halmi herself had ordered to be added. The old huts in the lowlands looked pitiful, wet, sagging, half of them without roofs. The difference was obvious to everyone. Choi came to see him that same morning, without Choi Rin, alone. The elder sat down across from him. He looked at Tae Hoon with a long, steady gaze, and he spoke a sentence, slowly, articulately, as if he wanted the stranger to understand every word. Tae Hoon didn't understand everything, but he already knew the key words. House, everything, build. Cho wanted him to rebuild the entire camp. Tae Hoon nodded, but he raised his hand. Wait. He stood up. He led Cho to the stream. He pointed to the weirs, the fish in the pens, 2 pots every morning. Good, but not enough. Then he led him to the spot where the women were drying meat on sticks. The meat hung out in the open air. Flies were landing on it. After 2 days, it started to smell. Then he pointed to the fire pits. Smoke. He picked up a piece of meat, pointed at the smoke, held the meat over the smoke. Smoking. Meat that keeps for weeks, maybe a month. Cho watched. He was old. He'd seen a lot. But he didn't know about smoked meat. They dried meat in the sun, or air-dried it in the shade, or ate it raw. To them, smoke was just smoke, not a tool. Tae Hoon drew in the sand. A smokehouse, a pit in the ground. Above it, a frame made of poles. Meat and fish on the frame, smoldering coals below. No flame, coals, slow smoke, days. The meat becomes tough, dark, and it doesn't spoil. Cho nodded, but his expression was cautious. He had already seen that the stranger's inventions worked, but every new invention meant people being taken away from the hunt. It meant time. It meant risk. Tae Hoon understood. That's why he showed the second sketch. A storage shed, a house on stilts but without walls, a roof to keep out the rain, the floor high off the ground. Inside, shelves made of poles, for smoked meat, for dried fish, for the roots the women gathered in the jungle. Everything dry, everything in one place, all under one roof. Cho looked at the sketch for a long time. Then he raised his head and gazed across the river, toward where the jungle began. Thick, dark, dangerous. And he said one word. Tae Hoon had learned it last week. Winter. There was no winter here in the usual sense, but there was a dry season when game retreated deep into the jungle and hunting became difficult. Every dry season, the tribe went hungry. Every year. Choi pointed to the warehouse blueprint. Then he pointed to the sky. Then he clenched his fist. If the warehouse was full by the dry season, the tribe wouldn't go hungry for the first time in many years. If. Tae Hoon raised both hands. 20. Give me 20 men and 20 days. Choi shook his head. 10. 10 men. We can't take the hunters. Tae Hoon clenched his teeth. 10. All right, we'll make do. It took 5 days to build the smokehouses. He built 3, simple ones. Holes in the ground, lined with stones. Above each one, a frame of poles at waist height. A canopy on top to keep out the rain. The principle is simple. Coals and raw wood chips are placed at the bottom of the pit. The wood chips produce thick smoke. The meat and fish on the frame smoke slowly. 1 day for the fish, 2 days for the meat. The first batch of smoked fish was ready 2 days after he started. Tae Hoon took a piece off the frame. Dark, firm, it smelled of smoke. He broke it in half. Inside, it was dry and clean. He let Manhami try a piece. The old woman chewed for a long time, slowly, then swallowed. She looked at him and said something to the other women. Her voice was commanding. An hour later, all 3 smokehouses were running at full capacity. The women cut the fish into slices. They laid them out on the frames. They added wood chips. Manhami stood nearby and gave orders. Tae Hoon stepped back. He no longer needed to stand over them. They understood. He set up the storage shed next to the stilt houses, on the same site, higher the lowlands. The structure was simple. 6 posts, a floor at chest height, a roof, no walls. Instead of walls, there were woven mats made of vines that could be raised and lowered. Raised for ventilation, lowered for protection from the rain. Shelves on the floor, 3 levels. The bottom one for heavy items, pots of grain and baskets of roots. The middle one is for smoked meat and fish. The top one is for dried herbs and bark. The storage shed was ready in 8 days. Empty. It remained empty for the first 2 days. Then Manhalmi brought the first basket of smoked fish. She placed it on the bottom shelf, then the second, the third. Other women followed her. They carried pots of grain they had gathered in the jungle, baskets of dried roots, bundles of smoked meat. The storeroom was filling up. Slowly, but it was filling up. Tae Hoon stood there counting. At this rate, in a month the shelves would hold a 2-week supply for the entire camp. In 2 months, a month's supply. If they added the fish from the weir, and if the hunters brought back enough meat, the storeroom would be full by the dry season. For the first time in 5 years, maybe 10. It was at that very moment that Ho-Dee appeared. He didn't come alone. With him were 4 young hunters, all carrying spears, all with the same expression on their faces. Ho-Dee stopped in front of the storeroom. He looked at the shelves, at the smoked fish, at the pots. Then he looked at Tae Hoon, and he spoke, loudly, sharply, so that everyone around could hear. Tae Hoon didn't understand every word, but he understood enough. Women's work, fish, roots, shame. Hunters don't eat what they haven't killed with a spear. Real men hunt. They don't rummage through the mud like old women. An outsider is turning warriors into women. People were gathering around. Women, children, old people, other hunters. Ho-Dee wasn't speaking for Tae Hoon. He was speaking for them, for the clan. It was a challenge, a public one. Tae Hoon stood and listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to respond in a language he didn't really know. He waited for Ho-Dee to finish. Ho-Dee finished. Silence. Everyone looked at Tae Hoon. He turned toward the storage shed. He took a piece of smoked fish from the shelf. He walked over to Ho-Dee. He held it out. Ho-Dee didn't take it. He turned away. Tae Hoon didn't press the issue. He placed the fish on the ground in front of him. Then he turned to the other hunters, 4 young men. They looked at Ho-Dee, then at the fish, then at each other. One of them, the one with the wolf-like ears who had been the first to repeat the word damn, bent down. He picked up the fish. He chewed. Ho-Dee looked at him. His gaze was like a blow. But the hunter with the wolf-like ears kept chewing, and he nodded. All right. Ho-Dee turned and walked away. 3 of the 4 followed him. 1 remained, the one with the wolf-like ears. Later, Tae Hoon would learn that his name was Park Jong, and that he would become the first hunter to voluntarily work on the construction site. But that was later. For now, Tae Hoon just stood there, thinking. Ho-Dee wouldn't give in, that much was clear. The issue wasn't about the fish or the warehouses. The issue was who was in charge. Ho-Dee was next in line to be chief after Che. Everyone knew that. And now an outsider had appeared who was changing the clan's life faster than Ho-Dee could comprehend. This wasn't about food. It was about power. That evening, Nam Yu came to him, angry, ears pinned back. Her movements were sharp. She spoke quickly. He understood only part of it. Ho-Dee, brother, stupid, dangerous. She warned him. Ho-Dee doesn't just talk. He can act. At night, quietly, a knife in the side. An accident while hunting. Fell off the shore. Drowned. That's how they did it here. Always. Tae Hoon listened. He nodded. He knew. In Kenya, the village chief by Lake Turkana had tried to poison him when he realized that the white engineer with the well was becoming more popular than he was. Tae Hoon had survived back then because he noticed that his gourd of water smelled different. There was no gourd here, but the principle was the same. Don't give a person a reason. Don't humiliate them. Don't corner them. Give them what they want, or what they think they want. Ho-Dee wants to be a chief. He wants to be respected. He wants the hunters to look at him, not at the outsider. All right. Tae Hoon sat and thought, and then he smiled, because he knew what Ho-Dee needed. Not a spear, not bravery, a proper axe, made of copper or bronze, one that no other hunter in the jungle has, and so that everyone knows this axe was received from the stranger as a reward, not for free, as a reward. For that, he needed a forge. For a forge, he needed ore. To find ore, he needed to know where to look, and for that, he had to leave the camp. And he needed a guide who knew the jungle like the back of his hand. Nam Yu. After the rainy season ended, Tae Hoon built 3 smokehouses and a storage shed on stilts. Food supplies began to accumulate for the first time in years. Ho-dae publicly spoke out against the stranger, accusing him of turning warriors into women. The hunter Park Jong, with his wolf-like ears, sided with Tae Hoon. Nam-yu warned that Ho-dae was dangerous and might try to kill the stranger. Tae Hoon decided he needed a smithy and copper ore to win the hunter's respect with bronze weapons and neutralize Ho-dae. Tae Hoon asked Nam-yu to take him upriver. She refused, not because she didn't want to, but because it's dangerous outside the camp. Predators, snakes, neighboring clans, and the remnants of the cartel's scouts. A single woman and one unarmed stranger who can't even run fast. That's no expedition. It's suicide. He insisted. She growled. Literally. A low, guttural sound that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He didn't back down. He pointed to the stone axes. Broken. Dull. He pointed to the spears. The tips crumbled after every strike. He pointed to the storeroom. There's food, there's water, there's a roof, but without proper tools, he won't be able to do anything further. Nam-yu was silent, she thought. Then she left. She returned an hour later, with Pak Chong, a hunter with wolf-like ears, young, quick, silent, and with another warrior whom Tae Hong was seeing for the first time. Old, short, lean, with bear-like ears like Man Halmi's, scars all over his body. He was missing one eye. In its place was a white strip of scar tissue running from his forehead to his cheek. Nam-yu pointed to the old warrior and said his name. Tho. Tho was a tracker, the best in the clan. He knew every rock within a 3 days' journey in any direction from the camp. 4 of them. Nam-yu, Park Jong, Tho, and him. Nam-yu looked at Tae Hoon. She held up 2 fingers. 2 days, no more. He nodded. That's enough. They set out at dawn. Tae Hoon walked last, slowly, with difficulty. The others moved through the jungle like fish in water, silently, effortlessly. He snapped branches underfoot, tripped over roots, breathed heavily. Sweat streamed into his eyes after 10 minutes. Nam-yu turned around every 100 steps, at first with irritation, then with something resembling pity. Then she simply waited. 2 hours later they came to a stream, a tributary of the main river. Narrow, rocky. Tae Hoon stopped. He crouched down. He looked at the rocks in the stream bed. He touched them. He sniffed them. Ordinary limestone, sandstone, quartz, nothing interesting. They kept going. Up the stream, Tae Hong looked at the banks, at the rock outcrops, at the color of the earth. In Kenya, he'd looked for water by the color of the soil. Here, he was looking for ore. Copper ore, malachite, azurite, green or blue veins in the rock, a distinctive color you couldn't mistake for anything else. By noon, he hadn't found anything. They sat down to rest by the stream. Nam-yu brought them water in a rolled-up leaf. Pak Jong chewed on a strip of dried meat. To sat on a rock and stared into the jungle with one eye. Tae Hoon drank water and thought. The stream flows from the north, sedimentary rock, limestone and sandstone. Copper requires different types of rock, volcanic or metamorphic, green rocks, serpentinite. He needed to find a place where the rock type changed, a boundary. He showed Tho a rock from the stream, white, limestone. Then he drew another rock on the ground, green. He indicated the color with leaves, a green stone. Tho watched. He thought. Then he nodded, sharply, quickly, and he pointed with his hand. North. Further up the stream, half a day's journey. He knew the place. Toho looked at Nam-yu. She frowned. Half a day's journey was already on the border of the clan's territory. Beyond lay the land of the Boer clan. Hostile. But Toho had already set off. He adjusted his spear and set off, without looking back. Nam-yu cursed. Tae Hoon didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. She followed Tho. Park Jeong shrugged and followed her. Tae Hoon brought up the rear, as always. Tho led them to a cliff. Here, a stream had carved its way through a rocky ridge and was plunging in a small waterfall into a dark pool. The cliff walls were exposed, bare rock. and Tae Hoon saw it. Green, bright green, veins in the dark rock, as thick as a finger, branching out, like the roots of a tree. Malachite, copper ore. He walked up to the wall, touched it, picked at it with his finger, softer than the surrounding rock. It breaks off. It can be mined with a stone tool, not quickly, but it's possible. He turned around. Nam Yu was standing behind him. She was looking at the green veins, then at him. She didn't understand what he had found. A green stone. Beautiful. So what? Tae Hoon picked up a piece of rock with a green vein. It was heavy. He showed it to her. Then he pointed to her stone knife. Then he showed her that a knife could be made from this stone. Better, harder, sharper. She frowned. They already make knives out of stone. What's the difference? He couldn't explain it. He didn't have the words, but he memorized the spot, memorized the path. 7 bends along the stream from where it flows into the river. A cliff with a waterfall. The right bank. Green streaks at chest height. Enough to start with. They returned to camp by evening. Tae Hoon could barely walk. His legs were buzzing. His back wouldn't straighten. Nam Yu had been carrying his bag for the past hour, silently, without comment. Park Jang offered him a shoulder once on a steep descent, though paid no attention at all. He walked at his own pace and waited at the turns. The next morning, Tae Hoon began building a furnace. He chose a spot on the edge of the camp, away from the tents, because of the heat, because of the smoke, because of the sparks. The kiln was simple, a pit kiln. He'd dug ones like this in Laos when the locals asked him to show them how to melt down old bullet casings. A hole in the ground, deep, waist deep. The walls were coated with a thick layer of clay. The bottom was lined with stones. The clay had to dry and fire during the first burn, to become ceramic, to withstand the temperature. Next to it, he set up the bellows, 2 bags made of animal hides, each with a bamboo tube inserted into the neck and sealed with clay. The tubes led to the bottom of the furnace. The principle is simple. When you squeeze the bag, air flows through the tube into the furnace. The fire gets air. The temperature rises. Copper melts at 1080 degrees. A regular campfire reaches a maximum of 700. Bellows can raise the temperature to 1200 if used correctly. That's enough. He needed an assistant to operate the bellows, someone strong, with resilient hands, someone who could pump the bellows for hours without tiring. He thought of Pak Chong, but Pak Chong was a hunter. Taking him on would mean angering Hode even more. He thought of one of the women, but working the bellows is hard labor. It requires strength. The answer came on its own. On the 3rd day of building the furnace, as Tae Hong was coating the walls with clay, a woman he hadn't noticed before approached him. Huge, a head taller than Nam Yu, broad-shouldered, arms like the trunks of young trees. On her head, rounded ears covered with dark brown fur, bear-like. She stood there looking at the kiln, silently, for a long time. Then she crouched down beside him. She touched the clay on the wall. She sniffed it, and she said something. One word. Tae Hong didn't understand. She repeated it, more slowly, and she gestured with her hands. Fire. Stone. To melt. She knew what a furnace was. It was Mara, 28 years old, a bear girl from the Otter clan. Her father ran the only small copper smithy in the 3 Rivers region, a primitive one, an open fire and a stone basin. The temperature wasn't high enough for proper smelting. They could only produce small ingots, soft ones, good for jewelry but not for tools. Her father had died 2 years ago. Mara had come to the leopards because the otters wouldn't feed her. A woman blacksmith. No one took her seriously. She looked at his bellows, at the bamboo tubes, and her eyes burned. Tae Hong showed her the bellows, how they worked. He squeezed the bag. Air flowed through the tube. He showed her where the tube led, into the bellows. Mara took the bellows, squeezed them, with one hand. The bag, made of thick hide, folded like paper. The air surged through the tube so forcefully that Tae Hong felt a blast on his face, even though he was standing 2 steps away. He looked at her hands, at the bellows, and smiled. He'd found it. They fired up the bellows 5 days later. Tae Hong and Park Jong brought ore from the cliff, two heavy, green stone with copper veins. Tae Hoon split the chunks into smaller pieces with a stone hammer on a flat rock. It took a long time. Their hands ached. Mara helped. Her blows were more precise and stronger than his. They poured the fine ore into the furnace on top of a bed of charcoal, wood charcoal. They burned it for 3 days in a special pit, wood under a layer of earth. It smolders without air. It turns into charcoal. Black, light. It burns hotter than wood. Mara sat down by the bellows. Tae Hoon stoked the fire. Weak at first, to warm the walls, then stronger. Mara began to pump, rhythmically, powerfully. Left bellows, right bellows, left, right. Air flowed into the furnace continuously. The fire roared. The furnace walls began to glow. First red, then orange. The heat beat against her face. Tae Hoon stepped back a step. 2 steps. Mara didn't move. She sat there, pumping. Sweat streamed down her face, down her neck, down her arms. She didn't stop. An hour later, Tae Hoon peered into the furnace, carefully, through a slit in the upper clay lid that he had made for this purpose. The ore was melting. The green chunks were turning black, first then shiny, then liquid. Copper gathered at the bottom of the crucible in a small puddle. Red, bright, alive. He watched and couldn't look away. He'd done this 10 times in Laos, but there it had been a training demonstration. Here it was a birth. The first copper in this camp. Maybe the first proper smelting for hundreds of kilometers around. Mara saw it too, through the second slit on the other side. She stopped pumping for a second, just a second. She stared at the molten copper. Then her face changed. Tae Hoon saw it. Her lips trembled. Her eyes sparkled. She remembered her father, his forge, his dream of making something more than just soft ingots for jewelry. He didn't have time. She did. Mara took up the bellows again, with redoubled strength. The horn roared. When the fire cooled, an ingot lay at the bottom, a small one, about the size of a child's fist, red, heavy, copper. Tae Hoon picked it up. It was still warm. He turned it over in his hands. He showed it to Mara. She reached out her hand. He placed the ingot in her palm. She held it and said nothing. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She stood there, holding the copper in her hand, and wept, quietly, silently. Tae Hoon turned away. He gave her that time. By evening, the whole camp knew about the ingot. Tae Hoon, along with Nam Yu and 2 warriors, had found deposits of copper ore near a cliff with a waterfall on the border of the clan's territory. He built a pit furnace with bellows made of animal hides. Mara, a bear girl from the Otter clan and the blacksmith's daughter, came to help. She began working the bellows. The first smelting yielded a small ingot of pure copper. Mara began to cry, remembering her father, who had dreamed of a real smithy. A single ingot of copper meant nothing. Tae Hoon knew this. Copper is soft, softer than good stone. A knife made of pure copper dulls after 10 strikes. An axe bends. A spearhead crumples against bone. He needed bronze, copper and tin, 9-to-1. He had no tin. He hadn't seen any cassiterite, neither at the cliff nor along the road. Dark, heavy stones with a distinctive sheen. There were none. Maybe there were some further north, maybe on the other side of the river. Maybe there weren't any within 100 kilometers. He sat by the furnace and thought. Mara sat beside him. She was cleaning the bellows. She was recoating the cracks in the furnace walls, cracks that had appeared after the first smelting, with clay. In silence. She didn't ask any questions. She just worked. Tae Hoon looked at the ingot. Copper. Pure, soft. Without tin, there would be no bronze. But copper isn't a stone anymore. It can be smelted, poured into molds, forged. It's better than nothing. He started with something simple, fishing hooks. Mara listened to his explanation. He drew on a clay tablet, the shape of the hook, the size, the curve. Then they made a mold out of wet sand, tamped down, with a hook-shaped indentation. They melted a scrap from the ingot, poured it into the mold. They waited. They shook it out. The first hook turned out crooked, thick, ugly. But it was a copper hook. Mara picked it up. She turned it over in her hands. Then she took a stone and began to tap it. Her blows were precise, gentle. She could feel the metal. The hook straightened out. It became thinner. Tae Hoon sharpened the tip on a flat stone. Sharp. They carried the hook to the weir, tied it to a vine, baited it with a piece of meat, cast it into the water. 5 minutes later, the vine tugged. A fish, a big one. The hook held. It didn't bend. It didn't break. Mara smiled. A wide one. The first time he'd seen one. Its teeth were large, white, even. In 3 days, they made 20 hooks. Mara worked faster with each one. The 5th was better than the 1st. The 10th was better than the 5th. The 20th was a small, neat hook with the right curve and a sharp point. Tae Hoon handed out the hooks to the fisherwomen, to the women who went to the weir. Now they could fish not only in the pens, but also from the shore, with a fishing rod, using a vine with a copper hook. The catch doubled in a week. Then he made needles. For Soa, the healer came to the furnace herself, silently. She stood and watched. Tae Hoon asked what she needed. With gestures, she pointed. A thin stick with a hole at the end. For thread, a needle. She had been sewing up wounds with bone needles, thick and blunt ones that tore the skin more than they stitched it. Tae Hoon made her 3 copper needles, thin ones with a hole at the blunt end, sharpened on a stone until they gleamed. Soa took them. She twirled them between her fingers. She tested the tip against the pad of her thumb. A drop of blood appeared on her skin, sharp. She looked at him and whispered 2 words. He already knew them. Thank you. It was the first time she had ever thanked him. Then Choi Rin arrived with an order from her father. Knives. 3 of them. For the elder, for her, for Nam Yu. Tae Hoon shook his head. Copper knives are soft, poor quality. But Choi Rin insisted. She didn't need them for fighting, for work, to cut leather, to plane wood, to work with bone. Copper is fine for that. He made 3 knives, simple ones. The blade was as long as a palm. The handle was wrapped in leather. Mara forged the blades. Tae Hoon showed her the shape. They worked together for 4 days. Cho Rin took the first knife to her father. Cho took the knife. He turned it over in his hands. He tested the blade on the skin of his wrist. It cut off a hair. He nodded. He didn't smile, but he nodded. Tae Hoon gave the second knife to Cho Rin personally. She accepted it with both hands, slowly, carefully, as one would accept a gift, not a tool. Their fingers touched. For a second, she pulled her hands away, quickly, but not right away. Tae Hoon took the third knife to Nam Yu himself, that evening. She was sitting by her hut, cleaning her spear. He placed the knife in front of her. She looked at the knife, then at him. She picked it up, tested the blade, and smiled. Then she said something. From her tone, he understood. Better than stone, but not suitable for hunting. She was right, and then he decided. Enough waiting for tin, he remembered. In Laos, an old master had told him about arsenic bronze. Copper mixed with arsenic. Not tin, but arsenic. It also produces a hard alloy, not as good as tin bronze, but many times harder than pure copper, and arsenic. Arsenic is found in arsenopyrite, a yellow stone with a metallic sheen. It smells like garlic when heated. He'd seen those yellow stones, near the cliff, not in the malachite veins themselves, but nearby, in a different layer of rock. He hadn't paid any attention to them back then. Now he remembered. He packed up for the trip again. Nam Yu, Pak Chong, Mara instead of To. She needs to see the ore with her own eyes, so she can tell the difference, so she could go on her own later. At the cliff's edge, he found the yellow stones. He filled a sack. They returned by evening. Smelting arsenic-bearing ore is dangerous. Tae Hoon knew this. Arsenic fumes are poisonous. Work only downwind. Stand on the upwind side. Don't breathe in the smoke. He explained this to Mara, with gestures and drawings. He pointed to the smoke rising from the yellow stones. He pointed to his throat. Bad. Dangerous. Don't breathe. She understood. She was smart. They smelted in the open, on the riverbank. The wind carried the smoke toward the river. Tae Hoon stood upwind and supervised. Mara pumped the bellows with a wet rag tied over her face. First, they melted the copper. Then they added the arsenic-bearing ore. Little by little, Tae Hoon didn't know the exact proportions. In Laos, it had been just theory, numbers from a book. 2% arsenic to 98% copper, roughly. He was going by feel, adding in small portions. The molten metal changed color. It grew darker and denser. He poured it into a mold, flat and long, for a blade. He waited. He took it out. The blade was different, in color, in weight, in sound. He tapped it with a pebble, a ringing sound. Clear. Copper doesn't ring like that. It was bronze ringing, arsenic-laced, rough, but bronze. Mara looked at the blade. Then she picked up a hammer. She struck it, gently. The blade didn't bend. It didn't dent. The dent was tiny. She struck harder. The blade held firm. She looked up at it, and there was a light in her eyes. The first real axe was ready in 2 days. Mara forged it herself. Tae Hoon had only shown her the shape. The blade was made of arsenic bronze. The butt was made of stone cast in copper. The handle was made of hardwood. It was fastened with leather straps and copper rivets. Heavy, comfortable, sharp. Tae Hoon took the axe. He walked up to a tree. He struck. A splinter flew off, white, long, a clean cut. The stone axe left a jagged dent. The bronze one chopped. It really chopped. He struck 10 times. The gash was deep, even. A tree 3 arm spans in circumference could be felled in an hour. Not half a day, in an hour. He turned around. People were standing behind him, many of them. They had come at the sound, the unfamiliar sound of bronze striking wood. They stood and watched. Among them was Ho Di. Tae Hoon walked over to him. He held out the axe, handle first. Ho Di didn't move. He looked at the axe, at the blade, at the gleam of the metal, then at Tae Hoon. Everyone was watching. Tae Hoon waited. Ho Di slowly reached out his hand. He took the axe. He weighed it in his hand. He turned toward the tree and struck with all his might. A splinter as long as an elbow flew off and fell at Park Chong's feet. Ho Di looked at the cut, at the blade, at the clean, shiny edge without a single chip, and Tae Hoon saw something break in his face. The anger hadn't gone away. The anger remained, but something else had been added to it. Greed. Ho Di wanted that axe, more than he wanted to kill the stranger. Tae Hoon told him through Che Rin, who was standing nearby and translating. "This axe is yours, but you'll have to earn the next one. Bring me 10 sacks of ore from the cliff, green stone, and I'll make you a second one, for your other hand." Ho Di looked at him, then at the axe in his hand, at the sketch of the river that Che Rin had drawn with a stick on the ground, showing where the cliff was. Then he turned and walked away, with the axe. 3 days later, 10 sacks of ore were standing by the forge. Ho Di had brought them himself, with 4 hunters, in silence. He dropped the sacks. He looked at Tae Hoon. He waited. Tae Hoon nodded. "I'll do it." Ho Di left, but before leaving, he turned around. And for the first time ever, there was no desire to kill in his gaze. Pure copper turned out to be too soft for tools. Tae Hoon made hooks, needles, and knives out of copper for everyday use. He remembered arsenic bronze and found yellow stones containing arsenopyrite near the cliff. The first bronze smelting was a success. Mara forged the first bronze axe. Tae Hoon gave it to Ho Di for free, but asked for 10 sacks of ore in exchange for the second one. Ho Di brought the ore 3 days later. The hostility hadn't disappeared, but it had given way to respect for the object the stranger had created. Rumors of the bronze axe reached the neighboring clans faster than Tae Hoon had expected. A week after Ho Di received his second axe, 2 scouts from the clan. A small clan, about 40 people. They lived further down the river, peaceful, fishermen and gatherers. Mara was from there. The scouts asked to meet with Cho. The elder received them by the campfire. Tae Hoon was not present. He had no vote in the council, an outsider, a captive they hadn't killed. He didn't belong by the campfire. But Cho Rin told him everything afterward. Everything. Word for word. The Otter clan wanted to trade. They'd heard about bronze, about smoked fish, about houses on stilts. They wanted copper fishing hooks, copper needles, maybe a knife. In exchange, they offered fish, dried fish, lots of it, and shells, large ones, mother of pearl, which they used as spoons and bowls. And one thing that made Tae Hoon freeze when Cho Rin uttered the word: salt. The Otter clan had a place further down the river where the water from a side spring was salty, a salt lick. Small. It yielded only a little. But it yielded something. Salt. Tae Hoon closed his eyes. Salt is life. Salt is preservation. Meat preserved with salt lasts for months. Fish preserved with salt doesn't spoil. Hides soaked in brine become soft and don't rot. Salt is currency. Everywhere. At all times. In any world. He went to Che. For the first time, on his own initiative. For the first time, with a request that concerned politics rather than construction. Che Rin translated. Tae Hoon spoke slowly. He chose the words he knew. Where words failed him, he drew on a clay tablet. He proposed more than just trade. He proposed an alliance. The Otter clan would come under the protection of the leopards. They would set up camp nearby. They would share territory. They would share supplies. The otters would bring salt and fish. The leopards would provide bronze and protection. Che listened. His face remained impassive. His eyes were sharp. Tae Hoon could see what the old man was thinking. Not about salt. Something else. Accepting a foreign clan meant sharing food, territory, hunting trails. This is a conflict. Ho Day would be against it. The young hunters would be against it. The leopards had always lived alone, on their own, for themselves. Cho was silent for a long time. Then he looked at his daughter. Cho Rin didn't hesitate. She spoke, quickly, clearly, like someone who had been thinking about this for a long time. Tae Hoon didn't understand every word, but he understood the logic. She spoke of winter, of hunger, of the cartel's raids, of how the leopards alone wouldn't survive, that they needed people, more hands, more spears on walls that didn't yet exist. Cho listened to his daughter. He nodded. He didn't agree. He just listened. Then he turned to Tae Hoon and asked a question. Cho Rin translated. If the otters come, what will you feed them? Tae Hoon replied. Weirs, 3 more. Smokehouses, 2 more. A vegetable garden. He didn't say that word. It didn't exist in their language. He drew earth, plants in rows, water from ditches. Cho Rin leaned in toward the drawing. Then she raised her head. She looked at Tae Hoon, then at her father, and she uttered a word that Tae Hoon heard for the first time. Long, complex. Later, he would learn what it meant. Growing food from the earth. They knew it was possible, in theory. The women gathered wild roots and grains in the jungle. Some even transplanted bushes closer to the camp. But there was no system. There were no rows. There was no irrigation. It was foraging, not farming. Cho nodded. With a single movement, a brief one, and that meant yes. The negotiations with the otters took 5 days. Choi Rin led them. Not Choi, not Tae Hoon. Her. The elder's daughter turned out to be a natural diplomat. She knew all the customs, all the formulas, all the ritual phrases that had to be spoken before the 2 clans sat down around a single fire. Tae Hoon watched from the sidelines. She was different when she spoke with foreign chieftains. Not quiet, not cautious, confident, precise. Every word in its place, every gesture measured. She negotiated the terms with the 2 otter elders like someone who'd been doing it her whole life. The otters were granted access to the forge, 10 copper hooks right away, 2 knives, a place for their tents next to the leopards' camp, protection. The leopards received salt, 10 sacks per season, fish, 20 baskets per month, and people, 40 people, That's 16 adult workers, 16 pairs of hands, for construction, for vegetable gardens, for everything. When the Otter clan arrived, Tae Hoon stood on the shore and counted the boats. 8, small ones, crammed with people, children, pots, hides, everything they had. They were betting it all on a single trip. It was here or nowhere. Mara stood beside him. She looked at her people, the people she'd grown up with, who hadn't fed her after her father's death, who hadn't seen her as a blacksmith. Now they'd sailed to her forge, to her hides, to her bronze. She stood there in silence. Her face was calm, but she hid her hands behind her back. Tae Hoon saw it. Her hands were trembling. He placed his hand on her elbow, gently, for a second. She looked at him. She didn't smile, but she stopped trembling. The first week after the Otters arrived, the camp was bustling. 120 people instead of 80. Crowded, noisy, unfamiliar. The children fought. The women fought over space by the fire pits. The hunters eyed the outsiders with suspicion. Ho-Dae walked around gloomier than a cloud, but he said nothing. The bronze axe at his belt was a stronger argument than any words. Tae Hoon worked 20 hours a day. New huts. No, new houses on stilts. Right away, from day one. He no longer built temporary shelters, only permanent ones. The Otters turned out to be good workers. They were used to water, to wood, to ropes. They drove in the stilts faster than the leopards. Mara was in charge of the forge. Hooks, needles, knives, an assembly line. Primitive, but an assembly line nonetheless. 1 smelting per day, 2 blanks per smelting. Mara forged. Tae Hoon demonstrated the shapes. By the end of the second week, every family in the camp had at least 1 copper knife. So, A organized sanitation rules for the new residents. Trash pits, hand washing, boiling water. The Otters resisted. Their shaman, an old man who smelled of fish and wore shell beads, called So-A's rules an insult to the spirits. So-A listened to him, silently. Then she pointed to the leopard's children, healthy. Then to the Otter's children, with swollen bellies, with sores on their skin. And she said one word. Tae Hoon didn't hear it, but Cho-Rin told him later. So-A told the shaman that his spirits were killing the children, that her spirits were healing them, and that if he wanted to argue, he should first show her at least 1 healthy child in his clan. The shaman fell silent. A week later, the Otters were washing their hands. Tae Hoon laid out a vegetable garden on a cleared plot higher up the slope. The soil was good, dark and rich. The sun shone on it for half the day. Water came from a ditch fed by a stream. He didn't know the local plants, but he knew the principles. Rows, spacing between them, watering, weeding. Sa'a knew the plants. She showed him which roots could be transplanted, which grains grow in the jungle and produce seed, which herbs are edible and can grow in clumps. Together they planted a plot the size of 3 huts. Small, but the first. Yoon-hee had found her way here on her own. An orphan girl, thin, ragged. She had come with the Otters, not their clan. They'd picked her up along the way, from a ravaged village further down the river. The cartel had passed through there 2 months ago. Not a single adult was left. She was sitting by a burnt-out fire when the Otters paddled past. Alone, silent. She wasn't crying. Tae Hoon noticed her on the second day. She was standing by the forge, watching Mara work, not at the fire, at Mara's hands, with such intense focus that Tae Hoon stopped in his tracks. Then she appeared by the warehouse, then by the vegetable garden, then by the water filter. She followed the work like a cat follows a mouse, silently, intently, eagerly. On the third day, he called her over. She approached, cautiously, like a small animal ready to run. He gave her a sack of coal, heavy for her slender hands. He showed her where to take it, to the bellows. She carried it, without asking questions, without complaining. She brought it. She set it down. She looked at him. She waited for more. He gave her more, and more. By evening, she had hauled all the coal from the pit to the furnace. Her hands were black. Her face was black. Her legs were aching. But her eyes were alive, for the first time since he'd seen her. That evening, he took her to Soa, to feed her, wash her, and put her to bed. Soa accepted her in silence, as one accepts what that was bound to happen. Yoon-hee fell asleep in her hut, curled up in a ball, small, dirty, alive. Rumors of the bronze attracted the Otter clan, who asked for an alliance. Cho-rin led the negotiations and secured favorable terms. The Otters brought salt and 40 new settlers. Tae Hoon resumed construction and laid out the first vegetable garden together with Soa. Yoon-hee appeared, an orphan girl from a village ravaged by the cartel. She began working at the smithy and in the warehouses. The camp grew to 120 people. Kang Sol arrived at the camp alone, at night, with a bow on her back and a knife at her hip. The sentry, Park Jong, spotted her on the riverbank and sounded the alarm. Nam Yu rushed out of the hut with a spear, Ho Dae with an axe. 20 warriors formed a semicircle by the water. The woman stood knee-deep in the river. Her hands were raised, her palms were open. She was wet, thin. Her hair was cut short, a man's haircut. A scar ran across her face from her left ear to her chin. Old, white. She wasn't a beast human, just an ordinary woman. Short, wiry. No animal ears or forearms. She began to speak. Tae Hoon stood in the back rows and listened. Her speech was different from the leopard's language, a different dialect. But Cho-rin understood. The woman said she had come alone, that her clan was dead, that the cartel had slaughtered them all 3 months ago. The men were taken to the mines, the women and children onto boats. She had fled into the jungle, alone. She had lived alone for 3 months, hunting, hiding, traveling upriver, because she had heard about the leopards, about bronze, about a stranger who builds houses and makes a fire hotter than the sun. Choi listened. Then he asked one question. "Why are you here?" She answered, "I want to kill the cartel's men. For that, I need walls behind me and people by my side. Alone, she can kill 3, maybe 5. With the clan, 100. Silence. Nam Yu snorted. Ho Dae smirked. One of the hunters laughed. The woman didn't move. She waited. Che looked at Tae Hoon. For the first time, the elder looked at the outsider in front of everyone, asking for his opinion. Not with words, with his gaze. Tae Hoon saw the woman. He saw the bow on her back. He saw her hands, calloused, with blisters on the fingers of her right hand with a bowstring rubbed when drawn. He'd seen hands like that in Kenya. Maasai women who had lost everything and learned to kill in order to survive. They were more fearsome than men because they had nothing to lose. He nodded. Cho nodded. Kang Sol emerged from the water. That was how she appeared in the camp. The next morning, Tae Hoon saw her by the forge. She was standing there, examining the bronze blanks, the tips for spears that Mara had begun making based on his drawings. Tae Hoon approached. She looked at him, appraisingly, the way one looks at an object one needs to understand, whether it's useful or not. She told him that something. Briefly, sharply. Cho-rin translated. "You don't look like someone who makes weapons." Tae Hoon replied through Cho-rin. "I don't make weapons. I make tools. Axes chop down trees. Knives cut meat. Spearheads are for hunting." Kang Sol smiled and asked, "And the palisade you've been sketching every evening in the sand, is that a tool too?" He froze. She watched him. He didn't know she'd seen his sketches. Every evening for the past 2 weeks, he'd been drawing in the sand near his hut. A layout, the camp from above, like a map, houses, warehouses, a smithy, a vegetable garden, and a wall. A palisade of sharpened tree trunks surrounding the entire camp, with turrets at the corners, with a gate by the river. He erased the drawings every morning, but she saw them, at night, when she came to the camp, or afterward, when she wandered in the dark, unable to sleep. He looked at her and decided not to lie. Yes, a palisade, a wall, surrounding the camp, because the cartel is coming. Not today, not tomorrow, but they're coming. Kang Sol nodded, for the first time, without a trace of mockery. "Show me." He showed her. He led her to the spot where he'd been drawing. He sketched it out again. A palisade, an irregular oval shape. It followed the contour of the riverbank and the slope. The circumference was about 400 meters. Posts made of thick tree trunks, pointed, dug into the ground, connected by crossbeams. It stood as two human heights. On the inside, a platform for archers at chest height. 4 corner towers, 2 gates, one facing the river, the other into the jungle. Console looked at the drawing for a long time. Then she crouched down. She picked up a stick and began to make corrections. There's a blind spot here. The archer can't reach that far. We need to move the tower. There's a hidden approach here. The bushes are too close to the wall. We need to clear them out for 20 paces. The bank is gentle here. Boats will be able to get close. We need stakes in the water. Tae Hoon listened. She knew. Not construction, defense. Where to stand, where to shoot, where they'll come from, how they'll attack. She'd seen raids, many raids, on her own clan. She knew what a cartel attack looked like, how many people were in a unit, what weapons they had, how they moved. He listened and memorized. Every word through Cho Rin. The cartel attacks from the water. Boats approach at dawn. Fighters in black leather armor. Wooden shields, long spears, short swords, made of copper. Their copper is better than what Mara makes. They have blacksmiths, real ones, in the north, in the cities. They don't storm them. They burn them down. They shoot flaming arrows. They set huts ablaze. When people flee, they seize them. Those who resist are killed. Tai Hong listened. Kang Sol spoke calmly, without emotion, like an officer giving a report. Only the scar on her face stood out more than usual. When she finished, he nodded, and said through Cho Rin, "I need you, for the wall, for the defense. I know how to build. You know how to defend. Together, we'll make sure the cartel can't succeed." Kang Sol looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "I saw 3 villages burn, 200 people, men, women, children. The wall didn't help a single one of them." He replied, "Because the walls didn't have an archer who knew where to shoot." She didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth twitched. Construction of the palisade began the following week. Tae Hoon threw all his resources into it, all the bronze axes, all available workers, 30 people every day. They chopped down trees, they sharpened the trunks, they dug them in, they tied them together. Kang Sol walked along the line and inspected the work. She poked at it with her finger. "The gap here is too wide. This post is wobbly. This platform is too low." The workers grumbled. She didn't listen. Her word was second only to Tae Hoon's on the construction site. He had given her that authority deliberately, because without her, the wall would be just a wall. With her, the wall would be a fortress. Nam Yu was jealous, openly so. She saw Tae Hoon spending hours with the new woman, on the wall, over the blueprints. In arguments she didn't understand, because they were about firing angles and blind spots. She came to him at night, angry. Her ears were pinned back, her eyes were burning. She spoke quickly and passionately. He already understood almost everything. 3 months in the camp, his tongue had grown stiff. She said she didn't like this woman, that she was dangerous, that she was a stranger, that she couldn't be trusted. Tae Hoon listened. Then he took her by the hand, for the first time. She froze, like a beast touched in an unexpected place. He spoke to her slowly, choosing his words carefully. "You are my hunter. You are my strength. Kang Sol is my wall. So-ah is my healing hands. Cho-rin is my tongue. Mara is my fire. I need all of you, but you come first. You found me on the sand. You're the first." Nam Yu looked at him. He was holding her hand, a large, strong hand with short claws at the tips of his fingers. She could have crushed his palm with a single squeeze. But she didn't squeeze. She listened. And slowly, very slowly, her ears perked up. She didn't say a word. She withdrew her hand. She stood up. She walked away. But at the entrance, she turned around, and for the first time in his presence, her eyes weren't yellow and hard. They were warm. The palisade was growing. 10 posts every day. 20. 30. Khan Sol drove the workers on. Tae Hong drew up plans. Mara forged the brackets and hinges for the gate. Pak Jong chopped down trees faster than anyone else. Even Ho Dae worked, silently, with his bronze axe. Not because he wanted to help a stranger, but because the wall was for him too. A month later, the palisade was complete. 400 meters of sharpened tree trunks, 2 human heights tall. A platform for archers on the inside, 4 corner towers, 2 gates, stakes in the water along the gentle slope of the bank. A strip of cleared land 20 paces wide outside the wall. Clear, open, not a single hiding place for an approaching enemy. Kang Sol stood on the platform by the main turret. She looked around. The river, the jungle, the clear strip in front of the wall. She drew her bow, without shooting. She just drew it. She took aim. She lowered it. Then she turned to Tae Hoon, who was standing below, and said, "Not bad, for someone who doesn't know how to fight." It was the first compliment Kang Sol had ever given.
Tae Hoon accepted it. Kang Sol, an archer from a clan destroyed by the cartel, had come to the camp alone. She explained how the cartel would attack and helped Tae Hoon design the defenses. Building the palisade took a month, 30 workers and all the bronze axes. The wall enclosed around the camp, complete with turrets and platforms for archers. The next morning, after the palisade was completed, Tae Hoon was awakened by a shout. Park Jung was standing on a corner turret, pointing down the river. A boat. 1. Small. 3 people in it. 2 were rowing. The 3rd was lying at the bottom. Nam Yu was the first at the gate, a spear in her hand. Kang Sol was on the wall, bow drawn, arrow nocked. The boat bumped against the shore. 2 raised their hands. Women. Young. Beastfolk. With fox ears. Pointed. Red. A man lay at the bottom of the boat. An old man. Unconscious. A wound on his side. Deep. Bandaged with dirty rags. The rags were black with blood. The women spoke quickly. Their words came in a rush. Tue Rin translated. The Heron clan. They lived 2 days' journey down the river. 3 days ago, the cartel's boats arrived. 5 boats. A reconnaissance mission, not a raid.
Not a raid yet. They traveled down the river and counted. Counted the huts, counted the boats, counted the people on the shore. Then they left. But before leaving, they took 4 people. 3 boys and 1 girl. Just like that. Like picking fruit from a tree, in passing. The old man at the bottom of the boat is the Heron chieftain. He tried to stop them. He was stabbed in the side with a spear. His wife sent their daughters upriver, to the Leo Partum, because she'd heard about the wall, about the bronze, about the stranger. She took the old man to her hut with A. She washed his wound. With boiled water, she stitched it up with a copper needle. Neatly, cleanly, she bandaged it with clean cloth. The old man was breathing, heavily, but he was breathing. Tae Hoon stood at the gate and looked down the river. 5 boats, reconnaissance. They're counting, so they'll be back soon. Not 5 boats, 12 or 20. He went to Cho. The elder was sitting by the fire, alone, without his daughter, without guards. He was just sitting there, staring into the fire. Tae Hoon sat down across from him. They were silent for a long time. Then Cho spoke, quietly, slowly. Tae Hoon already understood almost everything. 4 months in the camp, his tongue had grown heavy. Cho spoke of winter, not the season, a different kind of winter. The one that comes when all the fires go out and people stop singing in the evenings. He had seen such a winter twice in his life. The first time was when the cartel came 30 years ago and took his older brother away. The second time was last winter, when 20 hunters were killed in an ambush by the Boers who had sold them out to the cartel. He didn't want to see it a third time. Tae Hoon listened. Then he said, "We need the herons, and the cranes, and the wolves from the headwaters. Everyone, every clan that hasn't been wiped out yet." Chue shook his head. The wolves won't come. They've been at war with the leopards for 3 generations. There's blood between them. Old blood. Thick. Tae Hoon nodded. I know, but the wolves have something we don't. Tin. He had seen tin beads around the neck of one of the otter warriors. The man had said he'd traded for them from a merchant from the upper lands, and the merchant had gotten them from the wolves. Tin meant real bronze, not arsenic-laced. Real. Tin. Hard. The kind that doesn't crumble. The kind you can use to make not only axes, but also spearheads and swords and shield bosses, and everything needed for the war that is coming. Choi was silent. He was thinking. Then he asked one word. How? How do we bring the wolves here if there's blood between them and the leopard's blood? Tae Hong replied, Bronze. Give them what they cannot make themselves. They have tin, but no forges, no furnaces, no bellows, no Mara. We have everything except tin. A trade, not an alliance, not peace, a trade. First, goods, then words, then, perhaps, trust. Choi nodded with a single movement, and Tae Hoon understood that he had received permission. Choi Rin set out for the wolves 2 days later, not alone, with Park Chung and 2 otter warriors, and with a sack. In the sack were 20 copper hooks, 10 copper needles, 3 copper knives, and 1 bronze axe, a gift for the wolf chieftain. She returned 6 days later, alive, with an answer. The wolves had agreed to a trade, not an alliance, a trade. Tin in exchange for bronze items, 10 sacks of tin for 20 axes and 30 spearheads. The price was exorbitant. Tae Hong knew it, but he agreed. Because the first deal isn't about profit, it's about a door that's opened. Mara worked around the clock. Tae Hoon was right there beside her, smelting after smelting. The first real tin bronze was produced on the 3rd day after the tin was delivered. The color was different, the sound was different, the hardness was different. Mara struck the ingot and froze. Then she struck it again, and again. The metal didn't bend, it didn't dent, it rang out. She lifted the blank. She looked at Tae Hoon and said quietly, Father dreamed of this his whole life. 20 axes for the wolves were ready in 12 days, 30 arrowheads in 15. Mara forged. Yoon-hee brought coal and ore. Tae Hoon monitored the proportions and shapes, an assembly line. Rough, but it worked. When Park Jong took the goods to the wolves, Chae Rin went with him, for the 2nd time. She returned with tin and with news. The Wolf Clan chieftain wants to meet the person who makes axes that can fell a tree in an hour, in person. Tae Hoon looked at Nam Yu. She shook her head. No, it's dangerous. The wolves, blood, a trap. He looked at Chae Rin. She nodded. Yes, we have to go. It's a chance. He looked at Kang Sol. She shrugged and said she would go with him. And if the wolves tried anything, she'd have time to take out 5 of them before they reached him. He set off. Nam Yu went too, because Nam Yu. The wolves' camp was located upstream, a 3-day journey. Large. Larger than the leopards' camp before Tae Hoon's arrival. About 200 people. Huts made of animal hides and branches. Dirty, disorganized. No walls, no storage areas, no water filter. Everything the leopards had already forgotten, thanks to the outsider, the wolves didn't know yet. The wolves' chief was young, 25, large, with gray wolf ears and yellow eyes. His name was Tan Gu. He sat on a stone throne, roughly hewn from a boulder, and looked down at Tae Hoon. Tae Hoon did not bow. He did not lower his gaze. He simply stood there. Tan Gu spoke, sharply, quickly. Why did the fair-skinned one come himself? The axes are good, but why does he need the wolves? Tae Hong replied through Chae Rin, because the cartel will come for you just as it came for the herons and the cranes and the bears and all the rest. And when it comes, your stone spears won't stop it. But my bronze axes will stop them. But for that, I need your tin. A lot of tin. Not 10 sacks, 100. Tan Gu laughed. 100 sacks is all they have. What does he want for 100 sacks? Tae Hoon replied, "A wall, just like the leopard's wall. A horn, just like the leopard's horn. Houses on stilts, a water filter, smokehouses, warehouses, everything. He'll build a city for the wolves in a single summer, if they give him people and tin." Tangu stopped laughing. He looked at the bronze axe on his belt, then at Tae Hoon, then at Nam Yu behind him, then at Kang Sol with his bow, then back at Tae Hoon, and said one word, "Show me." Tae Hoon smiled. He'd heard that word for the third time now, first from Che, then from Manhaomi, now from Tangu. Show me. Always the same thing. Show me, and I'll believe you. He showed them. In 3 days at the wolves' camp, he set up a water filter. One, a small one, a demonstration model. When clean water began to flow from the bamboo tube, the Volkov's old shaman fell to her knees and howled. She literally howled, like a she-wolf. The others stood there in silence. Tangu tasted the water. He stared at the filter for a long time. Then he turned to Tae Hoon and held out his hand, palm up, open.
Tae Hoon placed his palm on top of it, small and weak, on the young chieftain's huge, calloused palm, and clasped it. An alliance. Not an exchange, an alliance. As they returned to the leopard's camp, Nam Yu walked beside him, in silence, all day long. Then that evening, by the campfire, she sat down next to him and rested her head on his shoulder. For the first time, her head felt heavy, hot. He didn't move. She was breathing evenly, and he felt her body relax. For the first time in all the time he'd known her, she wasn't on guard. She wasn't watching him. She wasn't jealous. She was just lying there, and he thought that for this one moment alone, it had been worth drowning in the storm and ending up in a world that shouldn't exist. The cartel's scouts had traveled down the river and counted the clans. The wounded chief, Sopel, had been brought to camp. Tae Hoon convinced Cho of the need to form an alliance with the Wolves clan for the sake of tin. Cho Rin conducted the negotiations. Tae Hoon personally visited the Wolves camp and convinced Chief Tan Gu to form an alliance by showing him a water filter. Access to tin was secured, and production of genuine tin bronze began. For the next 2 months, Tae Hoon slept only 4 hours a day. The Confederation grew. The Wolves sent the tin, 100 sacks as agreed. Tae Hoon sent Park Jong, along with 10 workers, to them to build a water filter and the first houses on stilts. The Heron clan joined after their chief had recovered. Yu cared for him. 3 weeks. The wound healed cleanly. No infection. The Heron chief sat across from Che by the fire and said that his clan was ready to live under the wall's protection if the leopards would accept them. Chue looked at Tae Hoon. Tae Hoon nodded. The Herons had brought 30 people with them. Fishermen, gatherers, 4 boats, and one thing that made Tae Hoon sit down on the ground and laugh with joy. A potter's wheel. A clay pot on a wooden disc that spun on a stone axle. Primitive, crooked, but it was a potter's wheel, the simplest kind. They didn't use it for making dishes. They used it to grind grain, unaware that they held in their hands the key to producing ceramics that didn't need to be molded by hand. Tae Hoon picked up the disc. He turned it over, placed it on a level surface, gave it a spin. It spun, poorly, crookedly. The axle was uneven. He remade it in half a day. A new axle made of hard wood, carved with a bronze knife. Smooth, smooth. The disc began to spin freely, for a long time, smoothly. He tossed a lump of raw clay onto the spinning disc, pressed his palms against it. The clay rose, stretched. A pot grew from beneath his fingers, thin-walled, smooth, in 3 minutes. The women standing around fell silent. They had been shaping pots with their hands their whole lives. One pot took half a day, crooked, thick, heavy. They saw how, in 3 minutes, a pot had taken shape from the clay, one that was better than any they had made in half a day. Manhaomi approached. She touched the side of the pot, thin, smooth. Then she looked at the potter's wheel, at Tae Hoon, and for the first time ever, she spoke a complete sentence to him that he understood fully.
"You're not human. You're the spirit of the river." He replied that he was human, just from a place where the wheels spin faster. She didn't believe him, but she took the pots. A week later, 3 women were taking turns working at the potter's wheel. Pot production increased tenfold. Pots for water, for storing grain, for oil, for Soe's decoctions, for Mara's forge. The pots became a commodity, the first real commodity that could be traded. Chui Rin sent the surplus pots down the river on a trading boat. Exchange. Pots for hides and dried fish from distant clans. Trade. Primitive, but trade. Tae Hoon watched as the boat sailed down the river, loaded with pots, and he thought that this is how civilizations begin. Not with swords, not with armies, with pots that someone wants to buy. But there was no time to think, because the cartel wasn't waiting. Kang Sol was the first to notice. The scout's boat had passed by at night, quietly, without lights. She was standing on the wall and saw a shadow on the water. One, long, narrow. The cartel's boat. She didn't shoot. She let it pass. Then she came to Tae Hoon. She woke him up. She said quietly, "They're counting again. They'll be here soon." Tae Hoon sat up. Sleep vanished instantly. He knew there wasn't much time. Maybe a month, maybe 2, maybe a week. He called a council. For the first time, everyone was there. Che Rin, Nam Yu, Hode, Man Haomi, Kang Sol, Park Jong, Mara, So-e, the Heron Chief, the Wolf Envoy. 20 people gathered around a single campfire. Tae Hoon spoke. In their language, with mistakes, with pauses, but in their language, for the first time without an interpreter. He said that the cartel was coming, not with 5 boats, 12 or more. They have copper swords, shields, armor, experience. They're professionals. They've been doing this for decades. A single wall won't stop them. We need more. We need traps in the river, underwater ones, that will rip the bottoms of the boats. We need archers on both banks. We need an evacuation plan for the women and children. We need a week's supply of water and food inside the wall for a week. We need everything he can come up with. Because if the cartel breaks through the wall, everything they've built over these past months will burn down in a single night. Silence. Then Hode spoke. For the first time ever, he wasn't speaking against Tae Hoon. He was talking about the cartel, about how they attack. He'd witnessed a raid 5 years ago. He'd lost his father in it. He knew how they moved. Fast, in waves. The first line, shields and spears. The second line, archers with flaming arrows. The third line, ropes and nets for captives. They don't kill everyone. They take them captive. Live cargo is worth more than dead. Console listened to Hode, then she nodded. She confirmed it. It was all true. She added a detail. Their archers fire in volleys, not aimed, in volleys, 20 arrows at once. The animal hides on the roofs catch fire instantly. Panic. People flee. And then comes the third line, the nets. Tae Hoon listened. He memorized it. He drew on a clay tablet, a map of the river, approaches, bends, banks, shallow waters. He thought. Then he began to sketch. Rafts, underwater barriers, thick tree trunks driven into the riverbed underwater, at an angle, with their sharp ends pointing upstream. The boat is moving fast. Its hull strikes an underwater barrier. The bottom ruptures. Water floods the hold. The boat sinks. Archers on the shore finish off the people in the water. Simple, brutal, effective. He showed the drawing to Kang Sol. She looked at it for a long time. Then she raised her head and said, "Good. But the barriers only work if they don't know where they are. And if they know, they'll go around them. We need to keep them in the dark. We need to make them go where we want them to go." Tae Hoon smiled. "Exactly. A decoy.
He pointed to the map. A fake camp, downriver, on the open bank. Huts, campfires, smoke. It looks like a settlement, but it's actually empty. Ambushes lie in wait on both banks behind it. Underwater traps lie ahead of it. The cartel's boats spot the camp. They head toward it. They run into the traps. They sink. Those who manage to swim to the surface are struck by arrows from the banks. Those who pass by the traps enter the decoy camp. Empty. And then, from both sides, Ho De and the hunters appeared. Kang Sol was silent. Then she looked at Ho De. Ho De was looking at the map. His eyes were ablaze, not with anger, not with jealousy, with fire. He understood. For the first time ever, he saw the stranger not as a rival. He saw a commander, someone who knew how to kill enemies better than he did. And that was the only thing Ho De truly respected. Ho De raised his head. He looked at Tae Hoon, and he said, "My men will lie in ambush. Tell them where to position themselves." For the first time in 5 months, Ho De said, "Tell me," not to me, not to the elder, but to a stranger. Tae Hoon nodded. The construction took a month. They set up the ambush at night so no one from the river would see. Park Jong dived in and drove stakes into the riverbed. It was hard work, dangerous. The current was strong. Once, it nearly swept him away. Nam Yu pulled him out by his hair, just like she had done to him once before. They set up the decoy camp 2 kilometers downstream, on an open sandbar. 20 huts, campfires, skins strung on ropes. From a distance, it looks like a lively camp. Up close, it's empty. Ambushes on both sides behind the huts, pits, stakes, nets strung between the trees. Kang Sol had positioned the archers, 200 of them, women and men. Each knew her place. Each knew where to shoot. Ho De, with 30 hunters, was stationed on the left bank. Pak Chong, with 20, was on the right. Mara had prepared pots of resin, 30 of them. Light them and throw them. Burning resin sticks to the wood and cannot be extinguished with water. The boat catches fire in a minute. Tae Hoon stood on the palisade wall and looked down the river. He waited. Everything was ready. The people were in their places. Weapons had been distributed. Women and children were inside the wall. There was a week's supply of water and food for a week. So A was in the hut with tools and clean rags, ready to receive the wounded. They waited. 1 day, 2, 3. On the 4th day at dawn, Kang Sol whistled from the upper turret. Smoke on the horizon. Lots of smoke. Boats. Tae Hong had organized a confederation of 3 clans. The Herons brought a potter's wheel, which increased pot production tenfold. Trade with distant clans began. The cartel's reconnaissance mission passed again. At the council, Ho De sided with Tae Hong for the first time. Underwater ambushes and a decoy camp were set up. 200 archers lay in wait. The cartel's ships were spotted on the horizon. 12 ships. Tae Hoon counted them from the watchtower. 12. Long, black, with high sides, 30 fighters on each. 360 men, against his 150, half of whom were women. They were sailing in formation, 2 columns of 6. Slowly, confidently. A man stood at the bow of the first boat, tall, wearing a long cloak. No helmet, no shield. Tae Hong couldn't make out his face from such a distance, but he knew. It was the commander, the one who makes the decisions. He climbed down from the wall. Quickly, he ran toward the river, toward the boat that was waiting. Nam Yu was already at the oars. She rowed him down the river, to the decoy camp, to the place from which he would command. Kang Sol remained on the palisade wall. If the decoys didn't work, if the ambush didn't stop them, if someone broke through, she was the last line of defense. She and the wall.
Tae Hoon reached the observation post an hour before the boats approached the decoys. The post was in a tall tree, a platform made of planks tied to the branches. From up there, he could see everything: the river, the decoy camp, the underwater barriers, and the ambushes along the banks. He climbed up. Nam Yu stayed below, holding a spear, to keep watch. The boats were approaching. They saw smoke rising above the decoy camp. Tae Hoon saw the first boat change course. It turned toward the shore, toward the smoke, toward the huts. The rest followed. They were heading straight for the underwater stakes. The first boat struck an underwater stake. The sound was like a gunshot. The wood split. The hull tore open. Water poured in. The boat began to list. People tumbled into the water. The second boat struck a second later. The third tried to swerve. It was too late. The fourth came to a stop. The helmsman saw what was happening ahead and tried to turn around. The current wouldn't let him. The fifth boat crashed into the fourth. At that moment, Tae Hoon raised his torch, a signal. Archers on the banks rose to their feet and fired a volley. 200 arrows, all at once, from both sides. Arrows rained down on the boats, screams, shields were raised, but the shields only provided cover from one side, not both. A second volley, a third. Hides were burning on the boats. Mara threw the first pot of resin. It smashed against the side of the sixth boat. The fire flared up instantly, brightly, voraciously. The resin burned on the wet wood. It wouldn't go out. The sixth boat was ablaze. The seventh was on fire. People jumped into the water. They were waiting for them in the water. Ho Dae and his hunters emerged from their ambush on the left bank. 30 warriors with bronze spears. They stood knee-deep in the water near the shore. Those who swam out were impaled on the spears, brutal. Tae Hoon didn't look. He was watching the rear boats, the 8th, the 9th, the 10th, the 11th, the 12th. They began to turn around. The commander was on the first one. No, the commander wasn't on the first one. The first one was sinking. The commander was on the 12th, the last one. He stood at the stern and watched his boats burn. He didn't shout. He didn't give orders. He just stood and watched. Then he turned, and the 12th boat headed back, downstream, away. Behind it, the 11th, the 10th. Those who could escape did so. Those who couldn't burned and drowned. The battle lasted an hour. When it was all over, the wreckage of 7 boats floated on the river. Bodies lay on the banks, many of them. Tae Hoon climbed down from the tree. His legs wouldn't hold him. His hands were shaking. He sat down on the ground. Nam Yu crouched down beside him, silently. She was covered in blood, not her own. One of the cartel fighters had swum ashore near the tree. She'd met him with her spear. Tae Hoon stared at the river, at the wreckage, at the bodies, at the smoke. He felt sick. He designed wells, bridges, filters, not traps to kill people. But these people had come to kill his people, to take their children, and he had stopped them. The only way that works when the enemy doesn't understand words. He sat there and breathed. Nam Yu placed her hand on his back, heavy, hot. He didn't move. Then Ho Dae arrived, dirty, wet, a bronze axe covered in blood. He stopped in front of Tae Hoon, looked down at him, and for the first time ever, he did something no one expected. He dropped to one knee. He didn't bow his head, no. Ho Dae would never bow his head. But he dropped to one knee, and he said 3 words. Tae Hoon understood every one. You were right. Then he stood up, turned around, and walked back to his hunters. Nam Yu watched him go. Then she looked at Tae Hoon, and on her face was an expression he'd never seen before. Pride. Not for herself, for him. That evening at camp they took count. 4 of their own 4 killed, 11 wounded. So A worked until dawn. Copper needles, boiling water, clean rags. 2 in critical condition, but alive. The cartel's losses, 7 boats, about 200 fighters, killed, drowned, wounded. 5 boats had left. They might have carried 150 men, and the commander, alive. Tae Hoon thought about this. The commander had seen it. He'd seen the ambush. He'd seen the organization. Next time, he'd be ready. Next time, he wouldn't come with 12 boats, with 30 or 50, and not by river, overland, through the jungle, where there are no masked men. He'll need more time, more people, more bronze, more walls. He lay on the floor of his hut, staring at the ceiling. Nam Yu was lying next to him. It was the first time she'd stayed the night, not because he'd asked her to, because after the battle, she'd simply lain down beside him and closed her eyes, and he hadn't told her to leave. Because after what he'd seen today on the river, he needed someone by his side, someone alive, someone warm. She was breathing steadily, heavily. She smelled of blood, sweat, and the river. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow, he'd have to start over, build, repair, expand. Because this wasn't a victory, it was a reprieve. 12 of the cartel's ships had attacked, 7 of his by underwater raids and ambushes. 5 got away with the commander on board. The Confederation's losses? 4 killed and 11 wounded. Ho Day acknowledged for the first time that Tae Hoon was right by kneeling before him. Nam Yu stayed with him for the night. Tae Hoon understands that the commander will return with greater force. 3 months had passed since the battle. The camp had become a city. Tae Hoon didn't notice when it happened. One morning, he simply climbed onto the wall and looked down. And what he saw was not a camp. It was a city. Houses on stilts stood in neat rows. Between them were paths packed with clay. Drainage ditches ran along both sides. Water flowed into the river through gutters. It didn't pool in puddles. It didn't rot. Mara's smithy had expanded. 3 furnaces, 2 assistants from the wolves. Yoon-hee kept records on clay tablets. Every piece of raw material was recorded. Every ingot was counted. She had devised the notation system herself. Sticks for ones, circles for tens, crosses for hundreds. Tae Hoon looked at her tablets and saw the birth of mathematics. School was held every morning. 25 children. 8 of them were from the otters, 4 from the herons, 2 from the wolves. Yoon-hee taught them to count with pebbles, to write on tablets, to draw maps. Simple ones. A river, a camp, the jungle, the cardinal directions. She taught them what Tae Hoon had taught her, and she added her own touches. Songs to help remember numbers, stories to help remember words, games to help remember maps. She was a natural-born teacher. Tae Hoon saw this and knew that even if he were to disappear tomorrow, the school would not close. Yoon-hee wouldn't let that happen. Soa opened a second hospital at Wolf Camp and sent one of her students there. She taught her how to sterilize instruments, to wash their hands, to stitch up wounds with copper needles. Soa traveled between the 2 hospitals once a week, a 2-day journey each way. It was hard, it was dangerous, but she went. Because the children were sick there too, and there too they needed clean water and clean hands. One evening she came to Tae Hoon, tired, thin, her eyes red from lack of sleep. She sat down next to him by the fire, silently. He handed her a pot of tea, that same one, bitter, hot. She took it, drank slowly. Then she said quietly, "A baby was born today at the Volkov camp. A boy, healthy. The mother is alive. The baby is alive." It was the first birth where she used everything she knew. Boiled water, clean rags, copper needles, ash paste on her hands. And everything went well, for the first time. She fell silent. Then she added, "Before this, every 3rd birth ended in the death of the mother or the child. Every 3rd one." Tae Hoon remained silent. She turned toward him, and in her eyes was the realization that he had seen everything in this very world. Gratitude. Not for the needles, not for the water, for showing her that death wasn't inevitable, that there was another way, that hands aren't weak if they hold the right tools. She reached out, touched his palm, gently, for a second. Then she pulled her hand away. She stood up. She left. He sat there, staring at the bonfire, and he thought that of all the things he had built in this world, this one life, a mother and a child, alive, was more than a wall, more than bronze, more than anything. Cho Rin brought him a 5th ally, the Crane clan, a small clan, 20 people. But they had something no one else did. A long fiber vine from which ropes could be woven. Strong, flexible, rot-resistant in water. Such ropes are used to make sails. Tae Hoon had already been thinking about sails. The boats were rowed, slowly, laboriously. Against the current, it was agonizing. A sail changes everything. Speed, range, cargo capacity, mail, trade, exploration, everything. He made his first sail in a week. Simple, square, made of woven vines coated with resin to make them water-resistant. He hoisted it on the boat. The mast was made of bamboo. The sail was mounted on a crossbar. Ropes for steering. The wind was blowing from the south. The boat set off, against the current, without oars. Nam Yu stood on the bank and watched as the boat headed upriver. Then she turned to him and said that he must surely be the spirit of the river because even the wind obeys him. He replied that the wind doesn't obey anyone. But if you angle the sail correctly, you can harness its power. She didn't understand, but she smiled, for the first time in a long time. Widely, openly. She had fangs. Long, white, beautiful. The confederation of the 5 clans. Leopards, otters, herons, wolves, cranes. About 400 people. Common laws that Cho Rin had inscribed on large clay tablets and placed at the main gate. Do not kill within the walls. Do not steal. Do not poison the water. Divide the spoils according to the number of mouths to feed. Disputes are settled by the Council of Elders. Each clan has a vote. Simple, crude, but the first of their kind. Tae Hoon looked at the tablets and saw a constitution. Primitive, but a constitution nonetheless. A common market every 10 days. Pots, fish, meat, bronze, salt, hides, ropes, herbs, everything in one place. People came, they traded, they talked. Children played together. Leopards and wolves, who had been killing each other for 3 generations, sat around the same campfire and ate smoked fish. Tae Hoon stood off to the side and watched. Che Rin approached. She stood beside him. She was wearing a new cloak, made from fabric woven on the loom that Tae Hoon had assembled a month ago. A simple one, with a petal. Coarse fabric, but fabric, not hide. She stood beside him and said nothing. Then she spoke. Do you know what they call you? He shook his head. Senior master, not a chieftain, not a warrior, not a shaman, a master, one who makes things, one who teaches others to make things. He wanted to say he didn't need a title, but he didn't say it, because he understood. They needed it. They needed a word for what he had become. Che Rin looked at him, calmly, warmly, and she said quietly, Father wants you to speak at the next council, not as a guest, as an equal. He looked at her. She added, and I want that too. He nodded. That same evening, Nam Yu came to him. She brought meat and a pot of tea. So A brewed it, Nam Yu served it. There was no longer any war between them. A quiet peace, a strange one. Nam Yu stood guard. So A treated him. Kang Sol defended him. Che Rin translated. Ma'ara forged. Yun Hee took notes. Each did her part, and they all worked toward a common goal, keeping him on his feet. Because without him, they would return to where they started. For now, until they return. But the day will come when they won't return, when they know enough, when the school graduates its first students, when Soa trains 10 female healers, when Ma'ara trains 5 blacksmiths, when Yun Hee fills out 100 tablets. Then he will no longer be needed, and that will be his true victory. The camp has become a city with straight streets and drainage. Ma'ara expanded the smithy to 3 forges. Yun Hee runs the school and invented a counting system. Soa delivered her first baby without complications. A confederation of 5 clans with common laws inscribed on clay tablets. Tae Hoon is called the Senior Master. The first sail has been made. Tae Hoon has been granted the right to vote on the council as an equal. A year has passed. Tae Hoon stood on the upper platform of the main tower and looked down. The city lay before him. Not a camp, a city. 52 houses on stilts, 3 warehouses, a blacksmith shop with 3 forges and a separate casting pit that Mara had dug herself when the old forge could no longer handle the workload. A school under a canopy where Yoon-hee taught 30 children every morning. So-ae's hospital with a separate hut for women in labor and a separate one for the wounded. A potter's workshop with 2 wheels, a weaving workshop with 3 looms, a dock with 12 boats, 4 of which were sailboats. A palisade, enclosed and reinforced. A second wall of rammed clay mixed with lime, which Tae Hoon had begun 3 months ago and finished 2 weeks ago. The inner wall, stone, real. Between it and the palisade was a passageway for the defenders. 4 towers, 2 gates with bronze hinges and bolts. 430 people, 5 clans, 1 confederation. He stood and watched. A year. 365 days ago, he lay on the sand with his hands bound, staring into the face of a woman with leopard ears and a stone knife. Now he stood on the tower, looking at the city his hands had built. No, not his hands, their hands, everyone's. He only showed them, they did the work. And the more time passed, the more they did on their own, without his blueprints, without his instructions. Mara herself developed a new bronze alloy, a little more tin, harder, better for arrowheads. So herself figured out how to make splints for broken bones out of bamboo and resin. Kang-sol herself trained 40 archers to shoot on a whistle command. Ho-dae himself organized patrols of the territory, in groups of 3, along set routes, with reports that Yoon-hee recorded on tablets. Chae-rin negotiated with the new clans on her own, without him, in the 6th and 7th languages she had learned over the past year. They were learning, quickly, eagerly. Each of them found their place, and each place was greater than the one they had occupied a year ago. Tae Hoon came down from the watchtower. It was early morning. Fog lay over the river. The smell of smoke from the forge hung in the air. Mara was already at work, always the first. He walked past the school. Yoon-hee was setting out the charts for class. She saw him. She smiled. She had turned 18 2 weeks ago. She had come to him that evening, quietly, seriously. She stood at the entrance to his house. In the house that Nam-yu considered her own, the one that So-ah had filled with the scent of herbs. The one where Kang-sol would come up to the roof at night to look at the stars. Yoon-hee stood there in silence. Then she said, "I know you've been waiting, and I didn't come because you were waiting, but because I decided to." He looked at her, thin, serious, with hands black from coal, with eyes that a year ago held nothing but emptiness, but now held everything. He didn't answer that evening. He said they'd talk in the morning. She nodded, and she left. And in the morning they talked, for a long time, quietly. He told her that she was the most important thing he'd ever done in this world. Not a house, not a wall, not a blacksmith shop. Her. Because when he's gone, she'll carry on. She'll teach, and her students will teach, and their students. And 100 years from now, there will be children in this city who can read and count because, once upon a time, a skinny orphan girl picked up a clay tablet and decided she wanted to remember her mother's name. Yoon-hee listened, and she cried. Quietly, silently. Just like Mara did that day when she held her first ingot of copper. And he hugged her, for the first time, gently, the way one embraces something fragile and infinitely precious. He walked through the city to the pier. Cho-rin was waiting for him by the boat. Today was the day he'd been putting off for half a year. A journey upriver, to the tower, to the ruins that Tho had found 4 months ago. A tracker had returned from another expedition and reported seeing old stones in the upper reaches, beyond the wolves' territory. Stacked, not natural, made by human hands. Tae Hoon knew about the tower from legends. The shamans had told the stories. A man who spoke to the stones. 200 years ago, he came out of nowhere. He built, He taught. Then he vanished, leaving behind stones and silence. Tae Hoon had to see it with his own eyes. Joining him were Cho Rin, Nam Yu, Kang Sol, Park Jong, Mara, and Soa. Everyone, all together for the first time. They traveled by boat for 2 days, up the river, past the wolves' camp, further on, to places where there were no people, where the trees stood so thickly that the sun couldn't reach the water, where birds cried out in unfamiliar voices, where the river narrowed to 30 meters and the current grew strong. The sail helped, but they had to use oars too. Nam Yu rowed. Mara rowed. Pak Chung was at the helm. Kang Sol was at the bow with a bow. Che Rin was recording the route on a tablet. So A was looking at the banks and gathering unfamiliar herbs. On the 3rd day, they found a tower, or rather what was left of it. It stood on a high bank. Stones, dark, heavy, stacked neatly, hewn, mortar-bound. Tae Hoon crouched down and ran his fingers along the joint between the stones. Slaked lime, sand, fine gravel, mortar. Real, high quality. Whoever built this knew what they were doing. The tower had been destroyed. The upper part had collapsed. Stones lay scattered around, overgrown with moss and vines. Trees had sprouted through the walls, but the foundation remained standing, solid, with thick walls, 1.5 meters thick. Inside was an empty space, round, 4 meters in diameter. On the floor lay debris, mud, leaves, and roots. Tae Hoon began clearing it away with his hands. A helped him. Cho Rin helped him. An hour later, he found the floor. Stone, smooth, polished, hidden under 200 years' worth of dirt. There were lines on the floor, carved into the stone. Tae Hoon cleaned them off. He knelt down and looked. Symbols, familiar ones. His hands trembled. They were letters, Hangul, the Korean alphabet, simplified, modified, but Hangul. He read them, slowly, with difficulty. The symbols were old, faded, but legible. Whoever wrote them knew that someday someone would come and read them. The text was short. Tae Hoon read it aloud, quietly, in a trembling voice, in Korean, which no one here understood. My name is Park Jin-woo. I am an engineer from Incheon. I came here 7 years ago. I built. I taught. I tried to make a difference. It didn't work out. Not because they didn't want to, because I was alone. One person cannot change the world, even if they know how. You need people, lots of people, who will believe, who will carry on. I didn't find them, or I found too few, or I didn't have enough time. Illness took me before I was finished. If you're reading this, then you're just like me. You didn't come here by accident. This world calls out to people like us, when it's in trouble, when it's on the brink. I don't know why, I don't know who's calling, but I know one thing. Don't be alone. Find people, not tools, people. People are more important than bronze. Tae Hoon fell silent. He was kneeling on the stone floor of the tower built 200 years ago by a man from Incheon, an engineer just like him, who came here just like him, and failed, because he was alone. So A stood behind him. She didn't understand the words, but she sensed it, her ability, her intuition. She sensed that this man had been crying as he wrote those words. She placed her hand on his shoulder. He covered her hand with his own. Nam Yu stood at the entrance. She saw his face, wet with tears. She didn't understand why. Stones with drawings, old. What was so special about them? But she could see that he was in pain, and she stood there, silently, guarding him, as always. Kang Sol sat on a fragment of the outer wall and gazed into the jungle. Her bow rested on her knees, an arrow at the ready. She didn't go inside. She didn't need to. She was guarding the living. She couldn't help the dead. Mara stood by the wall inside the tower and touched the masonry. She felt the mortar. She sniffed it. She didn't understand the letters, but she understood the stone. and she could see that whoever built this knew what they were doing, knew better than she did, better than Tae Hoon, and yet he still lost. Cho Rin stood next to Tae Hoon and said nothing. She saw his face as he read. She saw the tears. She didn't ask. She waited until he was ready. He would be ready. Tae Hoon stood up. He wiped his face. He looked at each of them, at Nam Yu, who had found him on the sand and prevented him from being killed, at So Ah, who had healed his world with her pure hands, at Kang Sol, who had defended his walls, at Cho Rin, who had given voice to his thoughts, at Maru, who had given shape to his thoughts, at Park Jong, who had been the first to believe. Don't be alone. Find people. Park Jin-woo didn't find any, or found too few. Tae Hoon found them. He looked at Cho Rin. She understood without words. She took out a clean tablet, a stylus, and he dictated, in their language, slowly, clearly, every word. Here stands the tower of Park Jin-woo, the master who came first. He built, he taught, he didn't have time, but he left a path. Following that path, the second one came, and the second one found what the first one had not: people. Che Rin wrote. The letters were pressed into the wet clay, even, clear, in the language that she herself had helped Tae Hoon record and systematize, in the language of the Confederation, which would become the language of the Empire. Later. When Tae Hoon looks at this place in 2 years, a stone marker will stand here, and next to the tower, new houses will stand, a workshop, a school, because the city is growing, the empire is growing. 12 clans, 4,000 people, stone walls, a pier, roads, sailing mail boats, an army of 300 warriors with bronze weapons. And Tae Hoon will stand on the bank and look out at the river, and standing beside him will be those who have been with him from the very beginning. Nam Yu, with a spear, with warm, yellow eyes, who still sniffs his neck in the mornings, with with clean hands, with a bag of herbs, who is teaching her 10th student. Kang Sol, with a bow, with a clay tablet inscribed with the names of her dead, who are no longer just in her head. Cho Rin, with a new contract on the tablet, which she drafted herself, negotiated herself, and secured terms better than he could have. Mara, with soot-stained hands, with fire in her eyes, who has trained 5 blacksmiths, and each of them works bronze better than she did 2 years ago. Yoon Hee, with chalk in her hand, with 30 students behind her, who once picked up a tablet and decided she wanted to remember her mother's name, and she did. But all that will come later. Now, Tae Hoon stood in Park Jin-woo's tower, on the stone floor, amid the inscriptions of the man who came first and lost. He stood there, knowing he would not lose, because he was not alone. He stepped out of the tower. The sun was high in the sky. The river glistened. The jungle rustled. Somewhere far downstream lay his city, small, young, fragile, but alive. Nam Yu stood by the water and waited for him. He approached. She looked at him, tilted her head to one side, just like on the first day, a cat-like movement. And he spoke to her in her language, quietly and evenly. "Let's go home." She snorted, smiled, and walked toward the boat. He followed her, an engineer from Busan, senior master of the Confederation of 5 clans. A man who can't fight, isn't a good runner, and, left alone in the jungle, would die within 2 days. A man who found people, and they found him. The boat pushed off from the shore. The sail caught the wind, and they headed home. Down the river, toward the city, toward the walls, toward the mountains, toward the children who were learning to count with pebbles, toward tomorrow, which, for the first time in 200 years of this world, was better than yesterday.